Today is all about the Palestinian struggle. I want to keep it focused. Today is about 1948. Today is all about 1948 and from the perspective of the Palestinians and what happened in 1948. So I ask of you guys to please be respectful because we're going to be talking about tough I'm going to explain to you how the birth of the quote-unquote Palestinian refugee problem began, why it's contentious amongst historians, what the narratives are. I'm going to try to keep my bias as much out of it as possible. And just give you what is like the consensus, what's the debate, all of that kind of stuff. And why it's so important to what's going on right now. What are potential solutions to right a wrong of the past? All right. Eris, you're doing a good thing. Helping educate people should be an interesting interview. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll be talking about that stuff, and then soon I'll be interviewing Beast Process, who is a Palestinian. Just talk about Palestinian thing. Okay, I guess like my bias is, well, first of all, I was born in Israel. I also do believe that Israel has a right to exist as much as any other nation. I think whether or not nations have a right to exist themselves as a whole is up for debate. But then I just think it should be up for debate about all nations, like not just Israel. I am against the Kurd Israeli government. I basically been against the Kurd Israeli government for like the last 20 years. And I am against the occupation. I believe that that an ethnic cleansing happened in 1948, which is what I'm going to get into and why some historians don't call it ethnic cleansing and why some do. But I believe it was an ethnic cleansing. That's also the area of my studies. And I don't believe that Israel was founded on colonialism. But that's usually a semantic difference for how I define colonialism. Blade, thank you so much for subscribing with Prime. Okay, I have some problems with Jewish Voice for Peace, so they're not like terrible, but yeah, I've got some criticisms. But yeah, so I guess those are my biases. So some people call me as like whether or not I'm a Zionist totally depends on your definition of Zionism, right? If being a Zionist means, if you define being a Zionist as like kicking out Palestinians, creating a Jewish supremacist state, and supporting Netanyahu's current actions, then I'd say no, right? Like 100%. No. If you define Zionism of just believing in the Jewish in like the existence of the state of Israel and its right to exist, at least according to the 1948 borders, or the pre-1967 borders, then yeah, I guess I would be a Zionist. So that's why it's like, I don't know, it totally depends. Remember, words are tools, right? So it just totally depends on your definition of Zionism. Yeah, so those are my biases. I also believe in a two-state solution. I believe in a two-state solution, and eventually, hopefully, the two-state solution will meld after, two states, live side by side. I'm also open to, like, I guess, three-state solutions, but I think two states probably the best one. And hopefully, as the two states live side by side in peace, eventually they can mold towards and work towards a one state. Where you don't have to worry about where, like, what state just completely under democracy. But I think that needs to happen slowly, organically over time. But I think the way to get there is to right some wrongs of the past. And this is not very far off past. It's not like thousands of years ago, guys. Like, this happened 73 years ago. Man, I'll get into the 3-state solution sometime. Not today, though. Okay. Now I'm drinking some water. You guys need to remind me to hydrate, because otherwise I'll not drink enough. Either independent West Bank and Gaza separately, or giving Gaza and the West Bank and Egypt and Jordan respectively. Yeah, that's basically what it is. How about a state solution? See, Kami, that's why. Hey, Kami, Brad. Hello, hello, hello. That's why I will always say that I don't necessarily believe in Israel's right to exist as a state. Because I don't like itself, because I don't even know necessarily if I believe in like nations' rights to exist. And like, I mean, ideally, you guys know me, I have a fucking Star Trek bias. I want us all to be united, you know, under like one kind of thing, right? But that's why I will always say I think Israel has a right to exist like as much as any other state. So, and it's really important, I think, that people kind of use that kind of terminology, because, again, right, one of the stereotypes, like one of the problems in anti-Semitism is being a scapegoat, right, or having an unfair, oh my god, we have a hype train, thank you. Bane, thank you so much for resubbing with Prime, really appreciate it. And Kami Red, thank you for those 100 bits. Global one-state solution. Oh my god, Blue Cheese, thank you so much for subscribing with Prime. But yeah, this is why it's like important that if you are criticizing Israel a lot, to make sure that your criticisms are consistent amongst all other nations, because you have to understand that like we live still very much in an anti-Semitic society. The same way our society is still very much based on racism, it's also based on anti-Semitism. And that shit is in everything, and like in everything that we do. So, oh, Nate Platinum, thank you so much for continuing that gift sub. That was fucking awesome. So anyways, so we have a bias as a society, like in a Western society, which like Western societies are historically very, very anti-Semitic. We have a bias towards putting unfair standards on Jews, or having a tendency to blame Jews for things that we wouldn't blame other groups for. I'll give you an example. The 1930s in Germany, and this goes for a lot of minorities. Obviously, this goes for Black people. This goes for Indigenous people in Canada. This goes for like a lot of groups, right? So in the 1930s in Germany, there were a lot of businessmen, like wealthy businessmen, that benefited off of like the, of the economic crisis in 1929, right? And the Depression. And some of those businessmen were Jews. Most weren't. But it was the Jewish businessmen, and some of those... Oh, Broken, thank you. Oh my god. That's a lot of gift subs. Holy shit. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Let's get some hypes for Broken Design. Thank you for those subs. I really appreciate it. Woo! Everyone's joining the Aristocracy. Okay. Oh, thank you for those 100 bits. But yeah, there were Jewish like businessmen who did some shitty things to their workers, right? and took advantage of, you know, workers in dire straits and all that stuff. And like, this was a problem in general with businessmen. Oh my God, Sim Swanky, what the fuck? Thank you. Oh my God, that's so much. Thank you so much. Wow, thank you. You guys are the best. Sim Swanky, you're amazing. Thank you for all your support. Really appreciate it. But yeah, but it was only the Jewish business owners. So like a lot of people were doing wrong, but it was only the Jewish business owners that ended up being punished for it, right? And they ended up being propped up as scapegoats, as being the only ones who participated in it, right? And so like just in general, it's a good idea to make sure that your criticisms are like consistent amongst a lot of groups, because again, we all have these preconceived biases. And I mean, Jews ourselves have these preconceived biases because internalized anti-Semitism is a thing. So it's always important to make sure that you are consistent, with your criticisms of stuff that involves Jews, right? Just as a way to double check yourself. And I try to do this to myself too, even as a Jewish person. Zaydra, thank you so much for subscribing. Atira, thank you. Welcome to the Aristocracy. You're 97% of the way there. It's fucking amazing. Real talk, what do you think of the idea of a secular one-state solution? It's what Hassan believes is the only viable option. I like Hassan, but the only reason why he believes in that... Oh, he hit 100%. Yeah, the only reason why he believes in that is because he's not very educated about what's going on in the region, the history of the region. So I think that there's a lot of people who believe in eventually getting to a secular one state, right? But you need to get there slowly and organically over time. You can't just flip a switch and expect people to magically get along and not expect massive civil war and genocide and all of that stuff. Do you worry if the West Bank and Gaza were a single state, it'd create problems like Bangladesh plus Pakistan? Mill Mercy, I don't think it could be worse than what's going on right now. Spitz, thank you so much for subscribing with Prime. Thank you. And Call Me Brad, thank you for those 100 bits. Yes, Spitzy, welcome to the Aristocracy. All the people who are joining Aristocracy today, thank you. I stream every day at 2 p.m. and I'm always trying to bring you things from a historical perspective. Right now we are focused obviously a lot on Israel-Palestine. That is my area of expertise, so it's a little convenient because of what's going on in the news. But we do it about tons of other issues. Don't worry. Don't all solutions require super ideal conditions to work through, leading to awful things happening though? No, I don't think I think this two states is actually very realistic. And I'll explain why I think it's realistic. I think I explained it last stream, but I don't mind doing it another time. Today though, I want to focus on criticisms of Israel, criticisms of Zionism, and I think the biggest criticisms come during 1948, and I really think people often think that the issue stems from 1967, but I think it goes further back. I think 1967 is just a consequence of 1948. Oh my god, Call Me Brad, thank you for gifting those subs. Thank you. I'm glad that I got to meet you yesterday. Sam Swanky, like, I mean, I'm sure he says, like, maybe I'm wrong. I might be wrong on it. It's just, like, whenever I've heard him talk about the issue, he speaks in very simple, I don't know. We'll see. We will see. I admire him that he criticizes the Turkish government. I don't know if there's a clip of that. I know I talked about it last stream on... When did I talk about it last night? Friday? How about you interview? I actually interviewed Hassan a while back ago, like a while back. I'll try to get another interview with him, but it was just like an AMA. Nice, we got a level 3 hype train. Thank you. Thank you. Oh wait, it was level 5. Wait, that YouTube video wasn't it? No, like I actually talked to Hassan. Why do people think that was fake? There was like a legitimate conversation. Is there anything useful you think the Jewish diaspora could do to help with? I can't really figure out what I would do. Oh my god, so much. If you are a Jewish person, you have so much like in your hand, like you have so much you could do. There's so much. But yeah, I that's stuff that I will get into. I want to talk about what happened with 1948. Where's the link to the interview? It wasn't an official interview with Aristocracy, right? Like it was back when I was doing AMAs on CC. That was when I interviewed him. Okay. So, I'm trying to think. How do I want to start talking about the beginning of the Palestinian refugee problem? How can we convince evangelicals to recognize Palestinian rights? I do not know how to convert them. I do not, but I do know how to change the minds of pro-Israel people or Zionists. I definitely know how to change their mind. I'm sorry, Peter, I'm sorry. Okay, so 1948, Israel, May 8th, 1948, Israel is declared a state, right? It accepts the UN partition plan. It declares itself a state. The next day, all the surrounding Arab nations declare war. So Lebanon declares war, Syria declares war, Egypt declares war, Iraq declares war, Jordan declares war. Oh, why am I locked in this one? I don't know. So all the surrounding nations go to war with Israel, and Israel is now fighting a war basically on like three or four fronts. And they all lost. And they didn't all make peace with Israel. Syria is still technically at war with Israel. No. But Jordan and Egypt have made peace. Yes, they have. War, what is it good for? But yeah, so they all declare war. And I'm sorry if you've answered this before, but what would the borders be like? Nick, the borders would basically be East Jerusalem for Palestinians, Gaza, the West Bank, and probably some land swaps. But those are the general areas. Okay. With ceasefire, with Syria, it's just a ceasefire. Yeah, it is. Okay, so all the neighboring nations declare war, and it's important that leading up to this, right? Is that the purchase of land. Remember, we talked before about how beforehand the Palestinian economy, and when I say Palestinian, I'm referring to the area of Palestine, right? Okay. Like obviously there's no Palestinian government at the time or anything like that because the area of Palestine has been under the control of various empires. So, but we've talked about how the area of the Palestinian economy was mostly feudal. Very few people own their own homes. Very few people own their own land. It was mostly owned by foreign Arab landowners who are very, very wealthy, and kind of like lords, right? In like a Middle Eastern sense. And they would basically have, what are the equivalent of like peasants or serfs, working their land, right? It was a very, very shitty situation in general. So this is why when, say, like, there were a lot of, now the populations in Palestine, the Jewish populations in Palestine, weren't very wealthy, but there were some Jewish populations in Europe that were wealthier. So part of the Zionist movement was buying up a lot of that land. Now, when they bought up land from the wealthy Arab landowners, and the Arab landowners gave zero fucks about Palestinians working their land, right? They would sell that to them. And when they would buy the land, they would usually say, okay, well, the people working this land, we only want, like, Jews to work this land. So then they'd, like, kick them off the land. So slowly but surely, the area, certain areas started to be formed where they became, like, more and more Jewish population. And it was, like, I guess, like, a slow ethnic cleansing. Though there's a debate on whether or not that's the right term to use to describe at the time, because it wasn't really, like, there wasn't, like, an intentional, there wasn't really an intent to completely, like, destroy, like, Palestinian ownership, like, on the lands and working the lands and stuff. That happens later on in 1948. But overall, Palestinians start being displaced from their land, right? I shouldn't just say Palestinians at the time, but Palestinian Muslims, Palestinian Arabs. Anyways, now this is leading up to 1948. Yeah, it's displacement. It's displacement, right? It's just, like, unfortunate. I mean, you see the shit happen actually today. Where, like, wealthy people who work for, say, like, startups in, this is a problem in general with, like, capitalism and stuff, where, like, wealthy people who are, you know, working for, you know, big tech companies earning, like, you know, 6-figure salaries, they'll buy up land and, quote unquote, try to gentrify it in, like, in San Francisco. And then, like, the original people can't afford to live there anymore. Okay, so leading up 1948, now Palestinians still own, I guess, the majority of the land, technically. In the original Arab partition plan, they were given, I think, 45% of the land, technically just for them. And it was technically the better parts of the land. So it wasn't such a bad deal. But you can imagine from, especially, like, right now, like, there's a lot of Arab nationalist movements going on and stuff. They wanted basically a proper Arab state, the same way Jordan had just gotten a proper Arab state in Transjordan. And you mind, Jordan, also part of the same kind of population. So 1948 comes around, and the neighboring Arab nations all declare war because they do not want a Jewish state there. They were not going to accept any kind of deal. Like, that's just a fact. They see Jews as colonialists, and as colonizers, and they've also bought into a lot of anti-Semitic ideals that had been kind of pushed actually from the Nazis themselves. So, like, yeah, so they were not going to accept a state, and that's why they all declared war. Now, we obviously know that Jordan secretly works with Israel. They have a little conspiracy going there, you know, a little secret friendship. But in 1948, now the war technically starts, and, like, it starts beginning around 1947, but we say 1948 just because it's, like, it's easier. Yeah, it was really bad. And what starts to happen, so the war happens, like, all the Arab nations, like, kind of invade, and what starts to happen is that there starts to be, like, you know, a Palestinian Exodus. So, Palestinians from various villages started literally, like, leaving their homes. Now, I'm saying leaving, right? Because I'm kind of, like, I'm just giving a neutral term, and then I'm going to describe what I think actually, what that leaving really means, right? Will you post this to YouTube as a segment? I'll see, maybe. Yes, Son of a Cad, yeah, they were. Okay. 1 second, I want to get, like, the right numbers just so I'm 100% correct. Okay, sorry, I got the numbers just in case. I just want to double check that what was in my head was correct. So there starts being this mass exodus of Palestinians. Now, up until the early 1980s, the late 1970s, there was an old kind of Zionist narrative of what happened. And the Zionist narrative, and this is something that still gets purported to this day, even though it got thrown out by historians in the 1980s. But this old Zionist narrative, the Palestinians left because they wanted to leave an area where there was a Jewish state because they just hate Jews. Not true. I mean, some of them hate Jews, but that's not why they left, right? That's a lie. Number one. Number two is that there were Arab radio programming, where there was kind of like these like radio programs that were going on, that were being spread, telling people particularly, and there were, right, like from some Arab nations, particularly Egypt, saying to leave, especially for the women and children to leave, right? And I think only 6 villages. Now this is the idea. That's like the typical Zionist narrative of why they left, right? Because I mean, no one wanted to admit that they got kicked out. But out of like hundreds and hundreds of villages, only 6 left. Only 6 can be proven to have left because of those radio broadcasts. Only 6. Just let that sit in. Just let that set in, what that means about the other. Why do you think the other Palestinian villages, left? And I'm talking the final number of Palestinians that leave, right? And I'll call them Arabs now. That leave is 700,000 refugees. 700,000. That's a lot of people, right? This is a really, really big deal. $228 228 Palestinian villages were kicked out. I'm pretty sure that the number that's agreed upon is 700,000, but yeah, yeah, it was awfully nice of them. They just left. I mean, the idea that the old Zionist narrative was that they left because of because maybe they were anxious about the war, they didn't want to be near a Jewish state, and that the radio broadcasts were telling them to leave. So that all the blame was put on the neighboring Arab nations like Egypt. But as I mentioned, 6 out of 228 villages. There are 228 villages that completely disappeared, right? They're gone. So 6 out of those, all those villages are the only ones that we could prove, that historians have been able to prove, left because of the radio broadcast. This is why nuance is important. Yeah, I'm getting into the details. When people say ethnic cleansing, right? I want to arm you guys with the actual story of what happened. So instead of just using these massive big terms, you can actually know what they mean, right? In detail. So, out of 228 villages, right? And now this is something that was hidden by a lot of the Zionist narratives and stuff, and it started to come out by historians by the new historians in the 1980s. Yeah, no, moonwalking, yeah. No, people say that. For sure. So, Palestinians, that there are 41 villages. 41, which is a lot. So 41 villages, we know, were directly expelled by the IDF. Yeah, 41. So we have more villages where we can 100% prove. We have more villages where we can 100% prove that they're expelled by directly expelled by IDF from IDF sources. We are talking about 1948. This is during the war. So we have more we literally are able to prove more villages were kicked out by the IDF, were directly expelled by the IDF, than those just those small 6 villages that were, that we know left because of the radio broadcasts. So already the evidence is demonstrating that there's more evidence to justify blaming the IDF and the Israeli government for kicking out the population rather than the old Zionist narrative, which is that it was the Arab broadcasts. Khyberin, yeah, they do. They do. Is this a similar phrase that Israel built an oasis out of the desert, but people there lived? Yep, it's true. I mean, I grew up being taught in school, not by my parents, because my parents are a little more rational, but I grew up being taught in school that there was not one single olive tree in Palestine until the Jews showed up, right? Until the Jews returned to fix the land. Yeah, I know, Mr. Fings, I think 48 is the most important. 67 is only a result of the 48 war. Yeah, no, that's kind of shit propaganda that you get raised. I mean, I went to a very religious school, so. They taught me other fucking crazy shit, too. Like that girls are dirty on their period. So, I don't know. The corrupting influence of those damn olives, I know. But yeah. Where did you go to school? I was never thought this shit was... No, I didn't go to a secular school. I went to a religious school growing up in South Africa. Went to a religious Jewish school. Girls are gross. Okay. So 41 villages, we have evidence of direct orders from the IDF. These are civilian villages, guys. Civilian villages. Okay? I'm not talking about military outposts. At the time, the Palestinians had no army because they're not a proper nation yet, right? These are just people who had been regular civilians working their land. The only people working in an army were the neighboring Arab countries. There were no Palestinian militant groups or whatever. Nothing significant, at least. Yeah, they're ex-Ottoman citizens, basically, right? There's no military, right? So that's why there's no excuse for them to be kicking out these populations. So, here... So this is a direct order. I know most of you can't speak Hebrew or read Hebrew. But, yeah, this is a direct order. Because, you guys know I love my fucking primary documentation here. But this is a direct order by the IDF leadership to kick out for the destruction of certain Palestinian villages. Cool, I'll just trust your translation, right? Yeah, Dexter, thank you. Yeah, there's a whole wiki article about this if you want to double check other sources and make sure that my translation's legit and all of that stuff, right? But can you read a bit and translate for us? I don't know if I want to read the whole thing. Yeah, let me see if there's a whole article about it. Oh, that's wrong. Wrong group of people. So the period of Exodus, I guess, happens, remember the war starts in May 1948? right? The period of Exodus starts in October. This is when the war had already been going for a bit. And this is when Israel starts. Remember we talked about how Israel wasn't always winning the war? And started getting help from, you guys remember Czechoslovakia, right? Yeah, no. I know the pics I'm looking at are not 2S, don't worry about it. I just see squares and feel it. But yeah. So, the order that I mentioned, it says, and I quote, "Do all you can to immediately and quickly purge the conquered territories of all hostile elements in accordance with the orders issued. The residents should be helped to leave the areas that have been conquered." Unique phrasing. The residents should be helped to leave the areas. What do you think that means? How do you think an officer is going to take that? Like an officer, right? PI, thank you so much for subscribing with Prime. Thank you. But yeah, just in this stage that we're talking about, like 200 to 230,000 refugees leave just in this small period of time. It sounds basically like an ethnic cleansing. Yes, it is. Then this is why I think it's an ethnic cleansing. And I don't think there's any evidence that you can, like, this is something that historians agree on. But yeah, so we have direct proof of that happening for 41 villages. Now you're probably like, oh, well, I understand there's 228 villages. So like we've already accounted for 6 villages. Okay, now we've accounted for 41 villages. What about the rest? Yeah, 200K, those officers must have been really, really helpful. So, you're probably like, what happened in the other villages? Well, in the other villages, as I mentioned, right, the 1948 war, and I've talked about this before, but if you weren't here, the 1948 war has the highest propensity, the highest amount of war crimes and human rights violations that Israel has ever engaged in. And I know you're probably like, that's a big deal because doesn't Israel engage in human rights violations a lot? Yes. So it is a big deal. It's a lot of, now war crimes are happening from the Arab side as well, right? But again, today we're focusing on Israel. So Israel commits, the Israeli soldiers are committing tons of war crimes, right? Now, the war crimes are not necessarily handed down from above. We don't have proof of that. Though there's a lot of, I'll talk about reasons why some people still think that there are. Yay, war crimes for everyone, I know. And I talked in detail about my own family's, people in my own family and what they witnessed happen to Palestinian villagers. I talked about what someone I know witnessed, an Israeli soldier, just from my own interviews, witnessing what happened to a Palestinian woman. Were there Israelis opposed to this at the time? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's part of how we know about this stuff. Because of the witness testimonies. No, Miss Ness, it's very similar to that. Unfortunately, ethnic cleansing is often a pre-requirement of nationalism. That's the unfortunate truth. It's one of the problems with nationalism. But anyways. But it doesn't make it any less terrible. So there starts to be, so as I mentioned, there's a lot of war crimes going on, far more than the IDF. The IDF is actually a very highly trained army, very regimented. They're admired around the world military-wise. I'm not talking about morals, but military-wise, for their, incredible training. And because of that, it's very rare that someone in the IDF does something without orders. Right? They're very well trained and all of that stuff. Jonathan, like, Israel has committed a bunch of war crimes. I mean, first of all, like they're illegally occupying the territories according to international law. They used white phosphorus in the 2000s, even though, like, to the detriment of Palestinian, like, skin. Like, there's, like, a ton of records of this shit happening. I think the U.S. does get military help. Yeah, the IDF, in terms of military, if you're just, like, a military fan, we're talking morals aside, right? IDF is excellent, right? In terms of, like, you know, being, like, a very, very hyper, very well-trained army. They're, like, kind of famous around the world for that. So it's very rare, and, like, it's very rare that, say, like, the IDF will go and do something that's not according to their own orders, like where, like, someone just goes kind of rogue, right? Like, it happens occasionally, but it's very, very rare. If you link the video, I'll respond to it. I'll talk. But anyways, yeah, if you link the video, I'll respond to it soon. White phosphorus sounds like a skincare. Yeah, I literally cannot I cannot show you what white phosphorus does. Now, Israel has not used white phosphorus since, I think 2010. I don't think there's been any record of it ever being used. There were some rumors that it was being used in this particular conflict with Gaza. There's, like, all those things were lies. Like, I've never seen any actual evidence for that. Why does Israel have a military draft for most of it? It's a requirement. They need to, because of how small of a population they are and how much they're on the defense. It sucks. It's not, etc. Like, I'm not saying, like, wait, sorry, Jonathan, I'm not saying conspiracy theories. Like, this stuff is just, like, this is, like, raw, like, this is stuff that is even accepted by Israeli sources. So, I don't know. I'm talking about the Haganah. In 1948, the Haganah really does become like the IDF. So that's why I'm using the term IDF. Okay, let me see that video. I'll open it soon, but first I'll talk about this. Hey, Mr. Fantastical. All right. So you're probably thinking, like, what happened in the other villages? So the other villages, now there are 90 villages, right, where the residents in these villages left because they'd heard about what happened in the other villages. So in 90 of these villages, they left directly because they heard about the war crimes that were happening in neighboring villages. Now, can you imagine, first of all, if you're just like, these people are not living in, like, safe gated communities. If there is a war going on and you're hearing that the neighboring village, right, a woman just got raped, people had, like, limbs cut off, people were tortured, and, like, you know, and all that shit that happened, would you fucking stay? Like, let's be real. Would you stay? No. And to the Jews here, this stuff has happened to us a lot historically, in pogroms and stuff, right? And when that stuff happened, we would have to move to another village. That's why, if anyone should understand what that's like, it's us Jews. So, like, so that's how a lot of them started leaving. Now, I don't consider that them leaving, quote unquote, on their own. That's not them leaving on their own, okay? Like, yeah, if someone basically puts a gun to your head, tells you to leave, or says, like, well, look at what happened to the previous guy, that's not you making this, like, you're literally deciding for the sake of your family's survival. War thongs, we have records, war thongs, you are correct, about 6 villages. Six villages that happened. That we have knowledge about that happened. But keep in mind, we're talking about 228 villages in total. So it's a mixed case, but I'm talking about like majority. But yeah, so the 90 villages, we know 90 villages left out of fear. This is accepted by historians, right? By like literally historians. Now, the historian that I tend to use the most, right, who uses the most primary sources and his translation work is excellent, is Benny Morris. And Benny Morris is a Zionist. Like, in the sense that he believes in Israel's right to exist. He's an Israeli citizen. But he always says, and this is why you always want to separate Benny Morris, the citizen. This is like something I got taught by my advisor. You always want to separate Benny Morris, the citizen, from Benny Morris, the historian, because they're two different people. Right? And I think sometimes these are the best types of historians. Like people who, like historians who will try to completely separate their ideology, their personal biases, all of that stuff as much as possible, and just try to find out what happened. As simple and as crisp as that sounds. Regardless of whether it serves your narrative or a narrative that's useful for you. And this is why I trust him. And this is why he's considered like the father of Israeli-Palestinian history. And even though his current opinions, like his citizen opinions, little out there. But my advisor is an Ottoman Turkish historian. Very, very critical of the state of Israel. Does not like but he always told me, right, that Benny Morris's personal opinions do not affect his meticulous history. The reason why we have 700,000 Palestinian refugees, the reason why we even know that number is so big is because of Benny Morris. Yeah, it's like separating streamers on Twitter versus streamers when they're live. Are there some historians that disagree with the number 6? Yeah, there's some minor disagreements. Ilan Pape thinks that all 226 were forcibly evacuated, but he doesn't really have a lot of evidence for that. Though he mostly agrees with Benny Morris's initial research. There are still some, I guess, like old style Zionist historians that disagree, but the standard, what's considered like, I guess, like the standard historical consensus is what I'm telling you. But I'll get into what gets debated. Mari likes Safari. Thank you so much for subscribing for 2 months. Thank you. I don't know who Anita Shapira is. All right. Now, out of all those, so I examined 6 villages, right? I talked about 6 villages. Then I talked about 90 villages. I talked about 41 villages, and there's 46 villages left, because I know math is hard, guys, okay? Historians have to do math sometimes. It's really annoying. And so now you have 46 villages, and we know that they were abandoned. We have no clue why. Oh my god! Whoever is anonymous, thank you for gifting that sub to Naho. Thank you. Do you believe they have a right to return? Morally, sure, right? But pragmatically, I don't think it's possible for all Palestinian refugees and their descendants to return. I think there needs to be some kind of like, some can return. You'd have to negotiate it. Because as we know, there's also I think 900,000 Jewish refugees coming from neighboring Arab countries, because they're being systematically ethnically cleansed too. So there's a population exchange that happens. This is why war is bad, guys. This is why war is bad. All right. So 46 villages, we don't know what happened. We know they're abandoned. So the only guess that we can have is that, like, so it can be one of those options. Yeah, so it can be one of those options where you basically have, Arab broadcasts being told by Arab things, which I feel like is less likely because we only know 6 villages that did that. Or they're being directly told by the IDF to leave, which is a little more likely, but I still think less likely than the option that happened to 90 villages, which is the fear, right? So the fear of what happened, in the neighboring village, I think it's probably what I would guess is likely happened to those 46 villages. So, doing math, because math is hard, the majority of villages that we have records of, the majority of villages were either kicked out officially by the IDF or left because of war crimes committed by the IDF for the purposes of creating fear. So, this is why, right, putting all that together, right, I would say that an ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians happened in 1948. Now, there's some disagreement about what that means. So, for example, and I'll talk about the disagreement. So, a lot of Zionist historians will overemphasize the role of like the radio broadcasts. And there were radio broadcasts. As we mentioned, they influenced 6 villages, but like we have so much evidence that the majority of villages were not influenced by that. And what are the chances that those 46 villages that we don't know about, they just happened to all like listen to the broadcast and that's why they left? I don't know. I think it's very, very unlikely. So that's the Zionist narrative. There are other narratives. Now, there is a record of David Ben Gurion, or Ben Gurion, as he gets called. Do we know the size of these villages? Well, it totaled 700,000 refugees. I don't have like the sheer numbers on the top of my head. But just in the span of in a few months, 230,000 refugees leave. Just in the span of a few months. Between what, like October and March? Just to give you like knowledge of how quickly this happened. This isn't something that happened slowly over time from like the early, Why do you not carry notes on the top of your head? I'm sorry. Like if 6 villages were massive, but 40... No, but these villages on average are around the same size. They're like small villages because, as I mentioned, Palestinians as a whole lived in like a very feudal-like economic system. They were mostly rural. They were farmers. They were not living in like big cities or anything. Can we get college credits for this? I wish. Wouldn't that be cool? Oh, Azura TV, thank you so much. That's why I'm trying to actually I feel like in politics, we use like these terms, and on Twitter, you'll hear terms like genocide, ethnic cleansing, colonization, all of this stuff. And I feel like these terms get used so often that it's like, we sometimes forget where do these terms come from and what do they mean? What do they translate into? Like, how do we even come to that conclusion? Right? And I think it's really important to look at like history. And I think it's especially important for Israelis, because I'm an Israeli and I believe in Israel's right to exist as much as any other country, right? But I think it's very important that the marker of a country is that a country needs to be honest about its past and about the wrongs that it committed in its past, and in order to try to right them. You have to understand that, just think about 700,000 Palestinian refugees, and it all stems, and it all leads directly to so many, how many Palestinian refugees are there now with their descendants? They're in the millions, right? Someone can find me that number, that would be great. So like and all of those people are living with a genetic trauma, right? A culture trauma. Some of those people are still alive, right? Because this again was just 73 years ago. And when you consider and when you put on top about what's going on in, say, a place like Sheikh Jarrah, like in the Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem, or other war crimes that Israel's committed, right? You can understand from the Palestinian perspective why they are so upset, right? This is why 1948 from Israelis is called Yom HaAtzmaut, right? Like the year of independence. Sorry, the day of independence. But for Israelis, but for Palestinians, the year is called the Nakba, which means the Great Catastrophe. And you can imagine why this is a catastrophe for them. Now, I probably am going to dedicate a whole segment to why my theories and other historians' theories on why so many war crimes happened from the IDF in 1948. There's a lot of theories. Some of them are like psychological. Some of them are more like kind of fucked up. And like they feel like it was more planned. There's a lot of theories going on. But I'd have to dedicate a whole stream to that. Yeah, this is how, so those 700,000 refugees that quote unquote left their homes or abandoned their homes for whatever reason, because obviously I explained like three major reasons. Those are the Arabs that will be called Palestinians now. Now Palestinians get a different color driver's plate. They're not legally Israeli citizens, all that stuff. When people talk about apartheid or discrimination against Palestinians, this is the group they're talking about, right? Those people and their descendants. But there are also a lot of Arabs who don't leave their homes. There are a lot of Palestinians who don't leave their homes. Those Palestinians end up now being called Israeli Arabs. Now, some of those Israeli Arabs call themselves Palestinians out of, for political reasons, right? But like legally speaking, they're Israeli Arabs. I'm not telling them how to identify. I'm just talking about legality. But America comes in at the end of the story with freedom and bald eagles to fix all the injustices and bring McDonald's and kill. Yeah. But yeah, so anyways, once the war is done in 1948, most of these Palestinians want to come back to their homes, right? War is done. They want to come back. A lot of them thought they were only leaving for like a few days, a week. And they come and they're told that they're not allowed back. Right? There are two people, and because of course Israel wins the war, and they win more territory as a consequence of the war. And they say it was justified because they weren't the ones that started the war, which is true. But that's based on your own politics and your own moral arguments. But who else wins the war? A lot of people don't realize, but Jordan wins the war too. You're probably like, oh, that's so confusing because Jordan was working with Egypt and Syria and all this stuff. But no, Jordan won a ton of territory. So the West Bank and Jerusalem all fall under Jordanian land. And so Jordan starts occupying the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Now, there were a lot of Jews who lived in those areas. So Jews start being systematically cleansed of those areas by Jordan. Right? And now this is not something Palestinians are doing, this is something that Jordanians are doing. You know, King Hussein, because he loved Palestinians so much, right? That's another story. But yeah, so Jordan wins a lot of territory too, because of course they'd worked with the Israeli government to share territory. So Jordan wins some more territory, etc. And that area, especially in East Jerusalem, the area was originally owned by Jews, right? Of where I guess those Sheikh Jarrah like residents. Now they got ethnically cleansed out of the area. People who replaced them were probably other Palestinian refugees, right? Population exchange. Everyone's getting cleansed. Fucking sucks. They were supposed to get more territory as well. They're basically trying to play both sides, Jordan. I mean, it was strategic. It was smart. But it's shitty if you're, like, into Arab solidarity and stuff. But yeah, so that area was originally owned by Jews, but they got ethnically cleansed. And that's how the courts happened, ended up, kicking out the Palestinians from that land again because of, like, the land reallocation. This is why land reallocation suck. You don't want to, like, fix previous wrongs by creating new wrongs. And it's not like those Palestinian refugees fucking did it themselves. It was the Jordanian government. Anyways. So that's basically kind of the gist of what happened in 1948. And because, when we get into the details, there's like obviously some mixed stories and stuff, and that's how people can have very different opinions about what happened. But historians as a whole do not have very different opinions. Like, they agree on the basics. And those are the basics that I just told you. Yes, no, that's true, Menesanche. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Okay. I'm going to briefly put on this lecture of Benny Morris, who is the historian that I was talking about. He deals with so many amazing primary sources, talking specifically about this issue. Now, this is Benny Morris, the historian, that we're speaking to, not Benny Morris, the citizen. As I mentioned, there's two Benny Morrises, so.
And Brown University for inviting me. The creation of the Palestinian refugee problem in the 1948 war was one of the two important outcomes, important historically outcomes of the war. One was, of course, the creation of the Jewish state in the center of the Arab Muslim world, changing the geopolitics of the region.
Oh, one more thing. When Benny Morris published his book, The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem, everyone, because he's regarded so much for his extraordinary research on this stuff, people want to know, when they heard he was writing this book, every historian was like, oh my god, who is he gonna blame? Who is he gonna blame for the Palestinian refugee problem? Right? Who is he gonna blame? This is a really big deal. Because it's almost like he's like a celebrity in this world, right? And then in the end, so everyone went and bought his book. Everyone was excited. Everyone was peer reviewing the shit. And then you get to the end of the book, and then he says, and in conclusion, the cause of the Palestinian refugee problem, right? He doesn't put it solely on the blame of the Israelis, and this is where I disagree with him. But in the end, he says, the cause of the Palestinian refugee problem was the war. Which I guess is true, right? Because, the war is what caused, all those expulsions to happen. And so he says, so whoever you blame... So in the end, it's kind of like a cop-out answer, right? Because it's of course the war caused it. We all know. But, the key is, what about the details within the war? Well, that's his cop-out answer. Yeah, very infamous. Oh yeah, I will put on this lecture. I don't know why it's quiet for you guys. Let me make it louder.
region, and the second was the creation of the Palestinian refugee problem.
Is that better?
Important and historically significant because of its
Thank you, Large. Thank you so much for subscribing with Prime.
Is one of the major obstacles to any peacemaking, and one of the driving forces in the Arab enmity towards and campaign against Israel. It's worth noting, maybe at the outset, which is not normally said about the refugee problem, that in fact the 48 war created 3 refugee problems, not 1 but 3. One was the creation of Israeli refugees. 70,000 Jews were displaced in the course of the 48 war from their homes. 70,000, you might think is a small number, was actually 10% of the Jewish community in Palestine at that time. Say 30 million Americans were displaced in a war from their homes in America.
Yep.
10%
all comes down to 1948.
That would be a significant problem. So 70,000 created Jews.
Yeah, I'll react to the PragerU video after. I just need to rest my voice a little.
It was a problem. It was solved because most of the area earmarked for Jewish statehood, plus some other areas, it became the state.
Yeah,
of
Leo,
Israel.
I'm sorry.
These 70,000
Notice how Twitch gives 0 fucks about us Jews in general.
And the problem
like, I don't get to the front page.
The refugee problem from the 48 war. The second refugee problem, which is the one I'm going to talk about here, is the creation of the Palestinian refugee problem. But the 48 war created also a third refugee problem, not in 48 itself, but in between 1948 and 1964, and that was the displacement, to refugeedom in fact, of the Jewish communities in the Arab lands. From Morocco, stretching from Morocco through North Africa, through the Middle East, Iraq, Yemen, Egypt, Syria, they all had large Jewish communities. And all of these essentially vanished or were displaced or were intimidated into flight. That's probably the right word. Some of them were expelled as in Egypt in 1956, but most of them were simply intimidated into flight as a result of what had happened in Palestine and Israel in 1948, and a vast Jewish refugee problem, probably amounting to about 800,000 Jews who were displaced, was created as a result. That problem, incidentally, no longer exists.
Yeah, no one talks about that problem, and it's very, very frustrating. Because Palestinian refugees are awful and it's gross, but yeah, no one talks about all the 800,000 Jewish refugees, which is very frustrating, and it's a real thing. You could Google it. I think the main reason, so there's probably 2 reasons why we don't talk about it. Number 1 is probably some anti-Semitism there, and number 2 is I think that situation was mostly resolved because most of those refugees all went to Israel. This is why only 40% of Israeli Jews are actually Ashkenazi white Jews, or whatever you would call it, right? A lot of people think they're all Europeans. It's not true. They're actually mostly Middle Eastern. No, Ashkak, it's not the responsibility of the Palestinians. Right, but it is relevant, right, because they do replace the Palestinian population in terms of space in Israel. Yeah, no, exactly, Veggie, right? That Jews were able to go to Israel, so as a whole, those refugee problems got solved by Israel. Whereas Palestinian refugees have not been able to find a similar, quote unquote, safe space. I'm gonna start calling Israel that safe space. So that would really trigger some people. So that's exactly why. So Palestinians, and from I guess an Israeli or a Jewish perspective, they will say oh, so we took care of our own, but you didn't take care of your own. Meaning the other Arab nations didn't take care of Palestinians, which is true. They haven't been able to achieve citizenship in a lot of countries. They've been discriminated against. I mean, Jordan killed thousands and thousands of Palestinians. Just look up Black September. The Palestinian problem has not been fixed, and this is probably why we talk about it the most.
As well, because these Jews were absorbed. Most of them, the poor, most of them were poor, and the vast majority of them ended up in Israel and were absorbed and became Israeli citizens. However difficult the absorption was, and a small number of them were absorbed in Western countries, in France primarily, and Britain. So that refugee problem no longer exists either. It sort of vanished almost at inception. So one refugee problem remained, and that was, of course, the Palestinian refugees. And the Palestinian refugee problem,
which is why it's a big deal.
The creation of was the major expression of the collapse of Palestinian society in the course of the 48 war. Under the hammer blows of war and defeat in the 48 war, 700,000 people were displaced. About 700,000. There's an argument about numbers. About everything about this subject is in dispute, and so is the number. The United Nations checked the numbers in 40.
Yeah, moonwalking. Yeah, I understand that, but at the same time, it sucks, right? It sucks because at this time, like, Palestinian refugees are living in awful conditions around the world.
950 and came up with 711 or 726,000 Arabs uprooted from their homes in the course of the war. The Jews maintained, Israel maintained that 520,000 in all had been displaced. Arabs said the number was 900,000 to 1 million. That probably the number the United Nations offered was probably more or less accurate, and that was the number. Today, it's worth noting, I'll just jump to the present for a second. Today, there are over 5 million Arab refugees, Palestinian Arab refugees, on the rolls of the United Nations and its special agency for Palestinian refugees called UNRWA. The 5 million consist of those still alive from the first 700,000, the original 700,000, plus their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. That's how you get to 5 million plus. The Arabs, incidentally, maintain the number is closer to 6 to 7 million of Palestinian refugees. The problem refugees, incidentally, is in a number of ways problematic when applied to Palestinian refugees. It's worth mentioning before going into the origins. One is the second and third and fourth generations are not normally seen in the international community as refugees, as recognized as refugees. Germans who are expelled from the Sudetenland or were expelled from Eastern Europe and other places and ended up in Germany, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren were not recognized as refugees, and the same applies to Vietnamese.
I can see that argument. I mean, like, I'm not, my grandparents were expelled from Austria and Romania. So like I could see that argument. And it's not like I'm like a German refugee and all of that stuff. But it's mostly because I haven't gotten, like, I've gotten acceptance of Canadian citizenship, so.
Poles or others, usually the descendants are not. In this case, the world community, for political reasons, there's lots of Muslim and Arab states in the United Nations, continue to see them as refugees, which is a problem. The other major problem with the term refugees is if you look at the Oxford Dictionary or any normal dictionary, you'll find that a refugee is somebody who's displaced from his country as a result of war, persecution, religious and whatever. In fact, 2/3 of the 700,000 displaced from their homes in Palestine weren't displaced out of Palestine, they were displaced to other places in Palestine, 2/3. In other words, about 500,000 of the 700,000 odd refugees.
What he's saying is technically correct. However, the reason why people would still use the term refugee is because they're displaced not to, like, some of them were not just displaced to, like, Jordan or whatever, but they were displaced to places like Gaza or the West Bank, or East Jerusalem, which are very, very, very densely populated. And, you know, especially Gaza, is like an open air prison. So, like, you know, it's not, and they're like, yeah, so it's not exactly, I don't know. I would still consider them refugees.
So-called refugees, or those uprooted in the course of the war, moved to other places in Palestine. They were uprooted from Jaffa, they moved to Shechem or to Nablus, they moved to Jenin. They moved from one part of Palestine to another. They weren't uprooted from their country, and therefore, by normal definitions, they would not be accepted as refugees. And of course, this would certainly pertain to their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who still live in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, and other parts of Palestine. But we won't go into that. That's a semantic problem, but that's how the world sees it. These are called refugees, those displaced in 48 and their descendants.
Yeah, I agree, Jewish Echomaker. I agree.
There are two traditional explanations.
But he admits it's just a semantic issue.
Of why they became refugees, why they were uprooted from their homes. The Arab explanation is very simple. The Arabs say that the Jews intended in the Zionist movement to take over all of Palestine, to dispossess and uproot the Palestinians. And in 1948, given the opportunity of war, they did just that systematically as a matter of policy, and threw out most of the Palestinians from the areas which became the Jewish state in the course of that war. It was an expulsion, foreordained, planned, systematic, and this is what happened. That's the Arab explanation of how the refugee problem occurred, basically, and you'll still hear it from Arab commentators, politicians, and so on. That's what happened. The Jewish explanation is a little more complicated, and it says that either they left their homes on their own volition, which is a silly word, but that's the one used, voluntarily, meaning that they fled because of the flail of war. War approached their threshold, that approached their villages, their towns. They didn't want to be caught up in the war. They didn't want to be subject to Jewish atrocities. They didn't want to live under Jewish rule. And so they fled of their own volition, as the phrase went. Or the Arab leaders themselves asked or ordered or appealed to them to leave. For various reasons, one of which might be, according to the Jewish explanation, they wanted to clear the battleground for the future Arab states' armies' invasion of Palestine, which occurred in May 1948. So they told the Arabs of Palestine, before that, leave, clear the area. We will then be able, we Arabs will be able to conquer more easily without having to shoot up Arabs along the way. We will be able to invade the country more easily and without harming Arabs. And you will come, you Palestinian refugees who leave now will be able to come back to your homes and, of course, to get Jewish homes when we conquer and throw out the Jews. That was the Jewish explanation of why the Arab leaders called on them to leave, if there were such calls. But
Veggie, the reason why I wouldn't use the term genocide is because it just doesn't fit genocide. Like, there's no proof that there was any kind of intent to to like remove like Arabs as and destroy and kill Arabs as a population to wipe them off the earth, the way they are with other genocides. Like, for example, we have proof that the Turkish government had intent of like literally killing the Armenians and wiping Armenians off of the face of the earth. Even with say like smallpox blankets and the hundreds and hundreds of times that there were literally multiple genocides that happened to the indigenous Americans, we have proof that they literally wanted to wipe indigenous people off of the face of the earth, right? So it's like that's why I would use the term ethnic cleansing and not genocide. Do you need intent on ethnic cleansing? No, you don't. Ethnic cleansing can be like the result of something. I'm pretty sure. Ethnic cleansing is not an actual legal term. So that's why you don't need intent. Genocide's a legal term. But there are many, we've talked about the many different definitions of genocide. So. There are many, many different definitions of genocide because there's a legal definition, there's a historian definition, and yeah, there's the UN definition that people use, but the problem is with the UN definition is that the UN definition, as we know in law, it's not just about like what's written in law. There's also precedent law. Precedent law is a huge part of law in general, like all around the world. And there's never been a precedent, because you know how in the UN definition of genocide, the UN definition literally says that like, you wouldn't technically need even just one death. That it would just be like, like the intent to wipe out like that culture or something. So you could like say take the children, convert them, etc. And then it's technically genocide. Like that's the reason why it's not legally genocide, even though it's in the description of the UN, is because that's never been prosecuted in international court. So there's no precedent for that being seen. Whereas there's precedent like for that, including whenever there was like, death or actual like mass destruction in terms of human lives.
The Jewish explanation. The records opened by the Israeli state papers, kibbutz archives, local authority archives, and so on in Israel, and the papers opened by the United Nations, the British government, the American government. The British were in charge of Palestine.
Yeah, I would just, Veggie, I understand the reasoning, but I would still discourage you from using the term genocide, because fully, because if there ever is like a full genocide against the Palestinians, which I feel like is a possibility, we need that term to be able to describe how that's different if that ever happens. And God, I hope to God that never does, but I think it's actually, the possibility becomes more and more strong as Israel becomes more strong, and Israelis become more and more radical. So like I could totally imagine, I don't know, there being some kind of like systematic intent to wipe out Palestinians. And I still think that the word genocide needs to be reserved for something like that, because it's obviously very different. And like genocide, keep in mind, like there are other, like something can be really, really bad and it doesn't need to be a genocide to be bad, right? Like just when I use the term ethnic cleansing to describe, like I feel like what I described would happen in 1948, like I hope to God I described how bad it was, right? And I never used the term genocide once. So yeah, you can describe things, and this is an unfortunate effect of like Twitter and stuff. Like, yeah, you can describe things as bad as they are, you know, and you still don't need to use like those types of words, but yeah. But it's one of the reasons, for example, the Holodomor, a lot of Twitter talks about the Holodomor as being a genocide, right? But the Holodomor was like a huge atrocity, completely wiped out, you know, Ukrainian populations and other populations. But historians as a whole agree that it was not technically a genocide. That doesn't mean it wasn't bad. I mean, you can argue, I mean, I think there's actually some arguments that there are things that are worse than genocide, right, as well. Like, especially when you think about Stalin, and what he did during the Holodomor, right? But it's not like, but genocide is just a specific type of crime to describe something that, like a type of crime that we hadn't had a word to describe beforehand. Yeah, Veggie, I get it, Veggie. But yeah, like, no, like I'm telling you guys, like this is just like, that's why like when people call other people genocide deniers when they're saying that the Holodomor is not a genocide, I always found that really strange, because it's like, yeah, it just feels like the term genocide means nothing on Twitter anymore. And you guys know, like, I don't fucking like the Soviets at all. But like, yeah, just look it up. Like, there's just no historical consensus that it was a genocide. They've never been able to find proof that Stalin had any intent to completely wipe out Ukrainians and all that stuff. And that doesn't mean that what he did was okay. Like, that doesn't mean you're defending it. So, yeah. The Holodomor was, I think the consensus right now, I'm not an expert in the subject, but I think the consensus is that it was a result of like gross negligence, incredibly poor planning, and prioritizing Russians over Ukrainians, right? In terms of like food supply, the incompetence. Yeah, genocide, like, whereas like, you know, genocide requires like intent. You have to understand the displacement, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, all this stuff have, like, we already have words to describe those things. So, yeah. I just, like, that's why I'm very careful with, you know, with how I use the term genocide. Even if it's going to serve my political narrative or something like that. Because once you start muddying that term, it can be used against you. And I'm starting to see that already happen. Like, I'm seeing Israelis start arguing that, say, like, I don't know, like, Palestinians are trying to commit genocide against them when they, say, when Hamas, like, participated in terrorist attacks against, like, pizza buildings, Jewish pizza buildings or something. And, like, yeah, like, even mass killing of civilians, it's like, it's a war crime, but you need more than that to use the term genocide. There are records that Stalin wanted to happen. I know it's a matter of debate, but still, I don't mind calling. Yeah, I mean, war thongs, there's actually, if you, go to r/askhistorians, good subreddit, and they have a good discussion on why historians don't, as a whole, call the Holodomor genocide. There's also theories. Now this is not my area of expertise, so I encourage you all to fact check me and all this stuff, but this is just what I've heard from the brief classes I've taken on this. There are theories that the Ukrainian government overemphasized the Holodomor for political reasons, to kind of as a way to distract from their participation in the Holocaust. Right? It was kind of like, no, we didn't do it, you did it. Like you did it against us, like kind of thing. So there's a lot of theories along that. It's one of the reasons why Ukrainian historians have very different perspectives than other historians around the world. But yeah, it's contentious, and you can read about the debate, and it's certainly not my area of expertise. That's why I don't talk about it a lot. Yeah, displacement could be genocide. I guess, but yeah, you would have to require intent that you're trying to yeah, I know. This is so interesting. Glad someone talks about this live. Yeah, winning loser. I know, watch someone get fucking triggered by this, Eris, genocide denier. It's this is just historical consensus, of what people are talking about. But yeah, there's a really good article on r/historians. Just Google r/historians Holodomor genocide, and then you'll see a bunch of really good discussions about it from historians. It's a great subreddit. But also Hamas's founding charter legit has something close. Yeah, Hamas's charter does have genocidal intent in it, for sure. I mean, they literally, it's in their charter that they want to push Jews into the sea. So, but it doesn't mean that it's genocide, because you don't just need intent, you need action, right? Large-scale action.
Up to the 14th of May 1948, so they were there. These various groups of state and local and private papers, which were opened in the early 1890s.
They have a new charter in 27. No, actually, that's a misconception, Warthongs. So they did release a new public charter that got used by Abby Martin in her documentary. You guys can look it up, right? But it doesn't replace their original charter for their organization. It's actually really fucking slimy what they did. This is why Hamas sucks, okay? They released that charter basically just for good publicity, where they acknowledged Israel's existence. They said that their issue was with Zionists, not Jews, all the stuff that people want to hear, right? But they didn't actually replace their original charter, and you can look it up. Their original charter is still their official charter. So it's fucking a little slimy. It's a little slimy, right? It's like a PR tactic. And yeah, you could they literally still use that original charter. That's why when Abby Martin made that documentary, what was it? The documentary that was being advertised by the Serfs the other day, the Gaza Under Attack or something like that. She directly lies in that documentary saying that is the Hamas charter, because it's not. Their official charter is still the original one from the 1980s, where they call for Jews to be genocided. And it is directly anti-Semitic. Yeah, so advocating for Hamas is not a way to help Palestinians, all right, guys? I'm so tired of seeing leftists doing this, because Hamas hurts Palestinians. Every single time Hamas shoots a rocket, Israel uses it as an excuse to shoot a bomb and kill a whole building. So they literally play into Netanyahu's hands. So don't try to justify it. Don't fall into any traps that other leftists fall into, where they try to downplay what Hamas does, or downplay Hamas's intent, or just say oh, well, it's just the Palestinians defending themselves. In theory, right? Palestinians, I agree, have every right to defend themselves. Okay? Israel has a right to defend himself. Whatever. Okay? But you do not have the right to intentionally kill civilians. You do not have the right to commit war crimes. Right? If they were just targeting IDF people, it's whatever, it's war. right? But that's not what Hamas does. Hamas specifically targets civilians for the purpose of creating fear. And so for the purpose of completely destroying Israeli and Jewish society. And when Israel's done that, it's also fucking gross. But Hamas does that by its very nature of an organization. So this is why, like, do not fall into the trap of, like, trying to just, like, you know, act like Hamas is chill. Or, oh, it's just, like, you know, it's just the reaction of a group of people. So, like, you know, like, don't try to justify it. It's not going to look good. And you really, the biggest thing that you want to do if you want to help Palestinians is separate Palestinians from Hamas and argue that Palestinians, when they vote for Hamas, they really are voting because they don't have a lot of other choices. There's a lot of issues in, first of all, Hamas has excellent propaganda in the region. And you know, there are other choices. Fatah is incredibly corrupt and ineffective for them. So, like, just because just because I voted for Justin Trudeau doesn't mean I approved of him doing blackface. Yeah, Norman Finkelstein's gone totally off the deep end. Like, Norman Finkelstein, I don't know if you guys know. If you want to look up, like, an academic that has, like, that hates Israel, right? That's a good academic. Look up, like, Ilan Pappé. I've got some problems with Ilan Pappé, but overall, still legit dude, right? Norman Finkelstein, on the other hand, Norman Finkelstein originally wrote actually a really good book, The Holocaust Industry, which I actually think was a very brave book to write. I'm going to dedicate a whole stream to talking about that book and his writings. Totally legit. The other thing, though, is that Norman Finkelstein has been mostly kicked out of academia and has basically been kind of, like, humiliated by a bunch of really shitty actions that he engaged in and that are considered unscholarly. You can look it up and just Google Norman Finkelstein scandal or whatever, like Wikipedia. Don't want to dedicate a whole thing to it, but yeah, he's shitty. What do you not like about Jasmeet Singh? I don't know if I want to get into NDP stuff today. I'm more likely to vote for, like, Green Party because I really like Elizabeth May. My hot take. I like Elizabeth May. I think Norman does go against BDS. I mean, a lot of people go against BDS because of the organization has a lot of ties to anti-Semitism. So a lot of people are not, like, against the idea of boycotting Israel. It's just the organization itself. They've got a lot of things. A lot of what Finkelstein got ostracized for was his blood sporting with Dershowitz. Yeah, I mean, there was that, but there were some other things. Dershowitz isn't exactly respected either, so. Yeah, like, Dershowitz is mostly considered, like, a joke ever since he defended, what's his face? OJ. Yeah, and doesn't Dershowitz, like, didn't Dershowitz, wasn't he also a part of, like, Jordan Epstein's, or whatever his name, Jeffrey Epstein's, you know, little harem thing that he did? Wasn't he, like, connected to that shit? Yeah. So he's probably, like, yeah, it's probably a gross dude. I know. Hey, Zarika, welcome to the stream. How you doing? Yeah, Dersh went to the island. Yeah. You know, okay. Side rant. Anyone here who is a minority, you know when you see someone committing a crime that's, like, a really big public deal and they're, like, a member of your minority? Like, there's, like, a part of you that's like, fuck, why us? No. Like, when I heard, like, the last name of Epstein, or, like, even, like, with, like, Harvey Weinstein and stuff, I was like, fuck, god damn it. He's making us look bad. Yeah, it's embarrassing. That's exactly, and you shouldn't be embarrassed. Like, I shouldn't have, like, this group think, but it just feels, because you just know that when you're a minority, any representation, any negative representation is gonna stick. It's like how you just have one trans woman committing, say, like, a rape, And that's just going to be all over turf news and used as a way to justify hate towards trans people. So it's like, so when that shit happens, it's like, ugh. I guess CJ4, you're right. It could happen to, like, I'd say, like, not as common. Narissa, thank you so much for resubscribing. Thank you. Yeah. No, I agree. There are definitely some minorities who get, like, accepted. I guess, with, like, white upper class kind of stuff. I don't know if he was, like, religious or anything, but he's ethnically Jewish. But yeah, that's just, like, I don't know. That's just, like, this feeling. Like, whenever I found out, like, when I watched Son of Sam, I was like, why does he have to be Jewish? It's just shitty. Because it's just, like, I know I'm going to have to feel the brunt of that shit in my Twitter feed. Oh, hey. Hey, Negation. Well, thank you so much for, like, you know, for joining the community. Thank you. But yeah, the Holocaust Industry is actually a good book. I know it sounds like a Holocaust denial book, but it's not. I'll talk about it in another stream. There's some issues with it. Have you read How Jews Became White Folk? No, I don't believe that Jews are white, to be honest. That's my hot take. I don't like, I understand why Americans see that, but you have to understand that I'm not American, so I don't see the world with an American lens of, like, white and black. So, yeah, it just makes no sense. This focus on identity is unproductive and toxic. Oh, you're right, Chill Wisdom, you're right. I'm no clue, Veggie. No clue. Okay. I'm gonna put this back on.
1980s.
Oh, actually, I wanted to watch the PragerU video.
What you hear in most
Oh
of
my
the
God,
media
it's so loud.
and the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth. I was the commander of British.
Oh, the British Army is going to tell us the truth, guys. Oh no, if I keep talking like that, Francesca might come out.
Forces in Afghanistan. I have fought in combat zones around the world, including Northern Ireland, Bosnia, Macedonia, and Iraq. I was also present throughout the conflict in Gaza in 2014. Based on my experience and on my observations, the Israel Defense Force, the IDF, does more to safeguard the rights of civilians in a combat zone than any other army in the history of warfare. Why is this so? Firstly,
Okay, number one, I don't think that's a standard that we should be living. Like, armies, the purpose of armies is to kill. So, can you full screen it? Yeah, if I full screen it, it doesn't, like... But yeah, I don't know if, like, the standard is that in general.
Israel is a decent country with Western values run on democratic principles.
Oh God, it's so gross that they say Western values. I hate that. The Western values thing feels like such a dog whistle for white supremacy. It's like, oh, because these Jews have are like living according to like white morals, then like they're okay. Like, I don't know, it's gross. I don't like it. Like, I would agree that the IDF, because it has so much attention on it, does do a lot of things that other armies have not done. Like they drop like leaflets and let people know to like leave buildings before they leave it and all that stuff, right? Like I could see that. But on the other hand, the IDF also has done some really, really, really shitty things. So it's just like, it just feels really, really harsh, especially when Palestinians are still living under occupation, and the IDF represents oppressors to them. So it feels like really, really, I don't know, like cruel to say. Yeah, no, I agree. The IDF does put a lot of effort to make sure, because you have to understand that it causes Israel a lot of harm in terms of their reputation when Palestinians die. But what they try to do is they try to reduce civilian deaths, but try to increase the economic devastation to Gaza. So they do both, and I think that I think the economic devastation is pretty gross.
Israel has no more interest in war than Belgium does. In fact, Israel has never started.
Okay, here's the problem. When you say Israel, I would agree Israel as a country and its own entity and what their interests are. Like as a country, I would agree they have no interest in more war than Belgium does. Though Belgium's a really bad example. Like, Belgium's a bad example. I know what they're trying to say. They probably should use another European country. Like, yeah, just look about what King Leopold did to the Ethiopians. But anyways. Winning loser, I would say the latter in like the last 60 years, but in 1948, I think that there were orders. Okay. But like, yeah, Israel, I guess, like as an entity itself, does not have that incentive. The problem is, like, countries are not run by what's good for their own countries, right? They're run by humans. They're not run by like AIs that are like, magically creating the right incentives for that country as a whole. And then like this hive mind decides what to do. No, they're run by humans, and those humans are flawed, and sometimes those humans are corrupt, and sometimes those humans have other incentives. And right now, Israel's being run by Netanyahu, who, quote unquote, who like just happened to tweet this shit. So that's why I feel like we should stop using even things like Israel wants this, Israel wants this, Palestine wants this. Like, just talk about their leadership. Because a lot of times the leadership is not fighting for what's useful or good for that country. Hamas is the technical leadership in Gaza. Does Hamas actually help Palestinians? No. Whenever Hamas has led a second intifada, literally, it was an uprising. More Palestinians died than Israelis. Right? Even in all the Gaza wars, all the things, like whenever Hamas shot a rocket or something, it always leads to more Palestinians dying. They are not advocating on behalf of the Palestinians. They are a detriment to peace. They're the excuse that Israel uses to not pull out of the occupation in the West Bank. So, so Hamas does not advocate for Palestinians morally, even though legally they do. Make sense? Off topic, are you still religious? No, I'm not. I am an agnostic atheist, but I'm very culturally Jewish. And I like traditions. I can be a little trad wifey sometimes, like in terms of like just the personal lifestyle I like to lead. But I don't think that that's good for everyone. Yeah, exactly, Veggie, exactly. Do you like Kabbalah? I've never looked into it. It's very taboo in Jewish culture to get into Kabbalah, because you're not supposed to get into that. Yeah, Kami. That's my kink is trad wifey. Okay, that's my kink, so you can't hate on it. Feel like you had a strong Jewish American princess energy when you were young. Oh no, Veggie, I actually, I don't know if I want to get into this, but I was actually, I left Jewish school because I was bullied so much there. I actually had a very bad time in Jewish school. Like, I don't want to say it was like traumatizing, because like, obviously I wasn't like assaulted or anything, but it was definitely, it left its imprint on me. And I think it's caused me to feel very separated from Jewish communities. Like, to this day, I don't live in a city with a big Jewish community. I don't engage with a Jewish community. I feel very like othered from the Canadian Jewish community, and it feels bad. And I think that a lot of that stuff has to do with like my experience in Jewish schools. Yeah, I had a very bad time. I went to a very... I'm debating how much I want to say, because I don't want to I don't want to like contribute to negative stereotypes about Jewish people. Well, I went to a very, like, it was a private school, and it was very wealthy. Like, and I was there on a scholarship. But so most of the people I met, now Jews in Canada are not like wealthy, like as a whole or anything. But I went to a very wealthy Jewish school. So almost everyone I met was like the son or daughter of some kind of like business mogul or something. And I also didn't look like everyone, right? Because I'm mixed race. And I was not in the same financial situation as everyone was, because my parents were immigrants from South Africa and Israel. So, like, for example, I would be wearing clothes from like Walmart, and everyone else was wearing clothes from like Lululemon or something, you know? And so like I got bullied a lot because I was just like, you know, very different. My family we couldn't afford like at least like the kind of bat mitzvah that everyone else got, because like the kind of bat mitzvahs or bar mitzvahs that I went to at the time, they were like celebrity affairs. Like, I'm telling you, they were like something out of Hollywood, because I was it was a very wealthy school. I'm mixed Asian, Mongolian. Yeah, they are. They are Lithuanian and Mizrahi. Negotiating. No, yeah, so like when I was 12 and 13, just like bar and bat mitzvahs happening like all the time, and like you would have to go to like 4 like in a weekend, and they were all like these huge like celebrity like events. Literally, I remember at one of them there would be celebrities there like that were hired by these parents, like and all that stuff, and my parents couldn't afford something like that. They were not in that position. Did you go to Drake's bar mitzvah? Friday Living, no comment, right? No comment. I don't want to dox myself. But Drake did come from a very wealthy family. Okay, he lived in actually the wealthiest Jewish neighborhood in Toronto. Okay. Canada Goose, thank you so much for gifting that sub to Canada Goose. We're almost halfway towards our sub goal. Started with top and now we're here. Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, like that's why Drake's whole thing is very strange. But anyways, so like I experienced a lot of bullying. I always felt kind of separate, and I struggled a lot in that school. I did not do well. Kabirian, I don't know. Unfortunately, that entire side of the family got killed in the Holocaust because they had migrated to Romania, and then the Holocaust happened and they all got killed. That's something a lot of people don't talk about with the Holocaust, is everyone focuses so much on the people that were killed. They forget about the history that was stolen. There's so much like family knowledge and culture that was just lost. Some villages just got, boom, gone, disappeared. Entire culture, history, like ancestry, gone. Oh, CDM, thank you so much for subscribing. Tier 1, thank you. Yeah, we're more than halfway to getting my sub goal. It's fucking awesome. Yeah, no, it is tragic. Yeah, so I know nothing about that side of my history. I didn't even know what kind of Asian I was. I always knew my grandfather was like Asian. I mean, obviously, like visually it was very obvious. But I had no clue, I had no clue about that side of my ancestry or anything. We didn't know, like, I didn't know if it was Korean, Chinese. That's why, like, my connection to Asian culture is it's probably fucking more Korean than anything else. So, because yeah, I had no clue what it was. And it was only when I did my genetic testing that I found out for my whole family. I said, yeah, that I was Mongolian. I have no idea what happened with my great-great-grandmother and the rest of the family. I know my great-grandfather. Yeah, the history just completely gone. It's that happened also. It happened to black people in the United States. Their history stolen from them. Indigenous people too. You dreadlocked your peyot and your teacher hated that shit? Oh my god. Yeah, the kind of Judaism that I was raised with didn't do peyot. I was still in a Haredi kind of like community, but yeah, they didn't use payas. Are you saying Mongolia is just open air Korea? No, it's just because like Korean and Chinese and Japanese culture kind of like dominate Asian culture in the West. So a lot of Asians end up connecting much more to that culture rather than their actual country of origin. Yeah, half of my family's history ends in Ethiopia. Oh wow, you're Ethiopian? That's cool. There were a lot of Koreans in the USSR though, some of them in the Jewish Autonomous Oblast. Yeah. Yeah, so I've always felt kind of ostracized a little, like from Jewish communities growing up. And you have to understand also, like, I wasn't born in Canada either, so I was also an immigrant. I think there's just in general a problem with, like, immigrants fully connecting. But, I don't know. Like, that's why I live in a city with, like, no Jewish population. Most Jews would never do that. But I'm fine with it because I'm used to, this is gonna sound so emo, but I'm like used to being alone. But honestly, what's being really cool about being so openly Jewish and open about my culture, like, on stream is it's kind of helped me reconnect with that part of myself. I guess it's ironic because like I criticize Israel all the time. But I've actually, by doing so, I've been actually connecting a lot to like my Jewish roots and my ancestry and to other Jewish people. Like there's so many Jewish people that like watch my stream, and I've now made so many Jewish friends. Like I've never had so many Jewish friends. So that's really cool. That's like super, super cool. Oh, I love Reconstructionist Jewish communities. I actually love them. Yeah, I agree. It's just not in my city. There's not a big Jewish population. Reconstructionist Jews are basically like philosophical Jews. It's actually like their head rabbis have like PhDs in philosophy. It's really cool. Like they're like ethics people. Aw, thanks, I'm Swanky. Yeah, it's been cool like being able to like reconnect and stuff this way. I started bodybuilding in yeshiva, and that was even... Call me, you're always trying to make sure that I know that you're like, kind of buff and stuff. What are you trying to say? Like I now know that you work out. How do you feel about being on that all Jewish panel? Do you feel like you were right to be there, or like imposter syndrome? No, I actually feel like a lot of the other Jewish people there kind of are in the same boat as me. A lot of leftist Jews also feel like that in general. Because you have to understand that Jewish diaspora communities as a whole have become very right-wing. And it's so quick that we just get called like self-hating Jews for stuff. He wants you to come over and ignore him to play Guild Wars 2. Oh no. Oh no. Did I miss the interview? No. I'm still gonna be doing the interview. But yeah. We are just over halfway to my sub goal. Really, really hoping to hit 50. So if you can, I do these streams every day where I'll talk sometimes about personal stuff. You know, I talk about history. I source my stuff. You know, I get into history all the time. That's what I do. So if you want to support that kind of streaming, I really, really appreciate, you know, hitting that sub button, right? Or you can also support me on my Patreon if you don't want Bezos to take half. It's a great opportunity when my mods can link my Patreon. Which political party in Israel would you vote for if you could? Anyone that could get Netanyahu out. I'd vote strategically. Coke64, thank you so much for following. We gotta continue this PragerU video. Oh yeah, you're right. Okay.
What a war.
Oh my god. Wait. What? Who just... Some anonymous person just donated 23? Just hit our goal? Who did this? Oh my god, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow, thanks. I wonder why that's not starting a hype train. Wouldn't that start a hype train? Well, thank you. Let's all just give some hearts to anonymous donator, okay? Give some hearts. Yep, we hit the sub goal. I'm very happy. Oh, Jade gave 100 bits. Thank you, Jade. Really appreciate it. It was super nice watching you today. I gotta do shit. Okay, call me Brad. See you. Hey, Eris, can you have more of the man voice? You're gonna have to pay for that man voice, okay? I don't do shit for free. I need to eat. Should be about 4 minutes of fanfare solid. I hope Force doesn't mind waiting. Congrats. Eris is hungry. Yeah, I do. I honestly, ever since I started streaming, I now can afford to eat 3 meals a day. And I was like, I've started to realize like why eating 3 meals a day is so nice. Because like when you're struggling financially, like you just accept that you can only eat once or twice a day. Like that's just like a thing. Because it's really expensive. And now like, yeah, ever since I started streaming, like I think like a month and a half in, I could start eating 3 meals. It's been pretty fucking nice. Not gonna lie. Yeah. Epic Strangers, so many people are in that position though. Like so many people. Because it's like you're making hard decisions. Like, yeah. Still only eat twice a day. Poverty conditioned me. Yep. No, it does. It does condition you. Twitch keeps making me unfollow you. Why, Fabio? I want you to follow me. But yeah, that's the support I've gotten is like being so cool. I finally feel like I have a career, like a proper full-time career. It's like the nicest feeling in the world. Are you still a student? No, I'm taking a break right now. Just to focus full-time on streaming. I think I needed a break because I think I was in a little bit of a lull. I've been doing it for like so long. What are you eating? Chicken is cheap as fuck. Frozen quarter legs. Yeah, I'm not very good about like, I'm not very good with money in general. So I wasn't very good at like organizing my meals in like the most pragmatic way. Thank you, Stoic. That means a lot. I try my best. I try my best to bring some reason, you know? I mean, doing intermittent fasting for like 12 hours per day and it feels like I am back in college with no money. Yeah, that's funny. Okay, Okay, we are going to interview Beast Process. He is a Palestinian. Also has a YouTube channel. So let's get in here. Just gonna mute. Okay, it's done? Yes, done. Hey there, interesting article on how roof knocking is ineffective. Interesting, okay. I'll read that sometime. Okay, Beast Process, if you're around, just hop into the way. Oh, you're already there. Okay. Let's get him in here. I'll think what's good back. Okay. Hello?
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
First of all, how does my mic sound?
It sounds good.
Oh, good. Thank God. All right.
Yeah, can everyone hear? Can everyone hear you?
I want to talk about.
Oh, so I just want to check. Can everyone hear Beast? Is that what I should call you, Beast?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not? Alright, so I guess like I kind of wanted to get your perspective. But first, like, I think last time we didn't really talk too much about your ancestry and your family and all of that stuff. So could you tell me a bit about like kind of like your family and where they come from originally in Palestine and all that?
Sure. They come from the Nablus area. And that's about most of what I know. If I ask my parents, well, what are we specifically descended from? They would say, I have no idea. You know.
People want me to turn you up a bit. Okay, say something.
Yeah. My ancestry. I don't know too much about my ancestry, to be honest. If I asked my parents, they'd be like, "Oh, I don't know. You know, maybe we converted." They have like no idea. I know there was this. Even Israeli sources make the assumption that people in like the Nablus area, they were descended from the Samaritans. That's kind of the one of the theory. I think that was something like the first president of Israel said. So maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I've even heard like it's so hard because there have been so many populations in the area of Palestine and so many invaders that like, yeah, it's just you'd probably have to do like a genetic test to find out. I know that a lot of Palestinians descend from original like Jews and Israelites in the region too. But yeah, it's just so hard to know the details. Yeah, because there's just been so many populations. So like, what happened to your family, like in Palestine? Do you know like any of the story of like, guess like, how they got, removed or their experiences?
My parents didn't. My family didn't get removed. We're dealing with some very, very big issues currently. So there was a village near us that got set on fire by some settlers. And last year in 2020, it's those like, all settlers are illegal to me, but like it's the ones that even Israel recognizes as illegal, right? But they come with the backing of the IDF. They came into our village, and I think they tried to take some land from my grandfather. So some very annoying shit.
That kind of violence happens a lot, right? Like especially in the occupied territories.
Yeah, but it wasn't typical for my family's village, because usually that village is left alone. But now it's getting like, the expansion just keeps on happening.
It keeps happening. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was pretty scared because like the settlers are essentially like above the law. you know?
Yeah. Especially like I can understand, and I also understand why Palestinians wouldn't have any faith in like the Israeli judicial system as well. So it feels like there's just no consequence
Yeah.
to this kind of stuff happening, when there's often consequences for Palestinians doing it to Jewish villages, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm sure that
You know,
feels very frustrating.
The thing is, even when there is consequences, it just makes them go crazier, right? So like I think there was a situation where like the IDF like was going after this settler group, and like one of the settlers like got into a car crash and like, died or something, and they just like intensified the harassment of the population, and that's why there's been such an increase in settler harassment of Palestinians lately.
Yeah.
Because they got mad at the IDF for like, oh, you're gonna stop us?
Yeah, a lot of people they group Israel and the IDF with Jewish nationalist movements, which is what I would call those people, like Jewish nationalists, right-wing Jewish nationalists. But yeah, they sometimes often like oppose one another, even though, I mean, I'm sure to Palestinians, like, it's easy to see them as the same since they both participate in oppression of Palestinians. But yeah, like the Jewish nationalist groups often hate the IDF because they feel like the IDF is not as extreme right-wing as they want them to be. And, you know, and it goes back and forth like that. So I remember the last time when we spoke, we were talking a lot about the elections. So what's happened now? Like, because obviously since we've spoken, there was this huge new upswing in violence in the region. And now, like, Mahmoud Abbas has kind of postponed the election again. So, like, kind of what's going on?
For the moment, we're kind of left on. We have no idea what's gonna happen. I think that if an election were to happen now, I think Hamas would win, like, very easily. Because they could easily make the argument that, and I have, you know, family members who are like, you know, they defended Jerusalem, right?
Yeah.
They showed
and they've kind of taken this as a victory, right?
Yeah. But the thing is that narrative is just wrong, right? The Israelis stopped their assault not because they wanted to, right? So I saw a poll from the Times of Israel that said like 72% of Israelis wanted to continue the offensive, and this poll had like a 4% margin of error, but that's still like a sizable proportion of the population. So why would Netanyahu stop if so many people wanted this to keep going? You know, and Hamas's argument is like, oh, they're weak. They were gonna get afraid. They can't handle people dying or whatever. And but that's just not true if you look at that polling. So like, why did Israel stop its assault? And I would say it's because of international pressure. You know, like 250,000 people, when they knew Biden was going to show up in Detroit, I think 250,000 people showed up, and like really gave him Rashida Tlaib like really gave him the business. Yeah. On the tarmac. You know, Biden doesn't want the, you know, he wants to focus on he has like a 60% approval rating right now. He wants to keep that. He doesn't want to keep on have his like reputation get dragged down from, you know, and you have like people like in the squad, you know, calling Israel you know, an apartheid state now. It's you know, it's really changed. And also just like the protesting in the West Bank and in Israel, on the border of Israel, you know, all over the world. I think that's the reason why the assault stopped. And I think that it's important to point that out in order to diminish Hamas's propaganda.
Yeah, I've been really frustrated at how much I'm seeing, I guess, like, leftists kind of push Hamas propaganda thinking that they're helping Palestinians, when it really just feeds into Netanyahu's hands, like with the Abby Martin documentary and stuff.
It was all the protesters. That's the reason why it stopped. You know, it like even like even in Israel, all the Palestinians there were protesting, and you had people doing general strikes, and a lot of Palestinians work in Israel, and they just decided we're not showing up to work.
Yeah.
And a construction company lost $40 million. And I think it's for Palestine to, in any way be free, these protest movements need to happen more and more. And I think kind of, okay, leave everything to Hamas is a bad strategy going forward. And I think in general, we should keep encouraging people to, protest as peacefully as possible.
Do you think, I'm glad you said that, like, do you think that there's any chance, because I know that there's a small reform wing within Hamas. Do you think that there's any chance that Hamas can kind of reform itself? And, at least not necessarily stop doing violence, but at least like stop doing like indiscriminate violence or targeting civilians? Or be like less anti-Semitic?
I think it's possible, I mean, we have to realize they live in their own like little bubble.
Mm-hmm.
So like, if you ask them, "Oh, are you anti-Semites?" They're not going to say that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Of course.
I remember I was criticizing kind of Hamas to some Palestinians I knew, and they sent me a clip of their like founder saying, "Oh, we don't have any issue with Jewish people. They're brothers, but sometimes brothers are fighting, their cousins are fighting, and things like that." So I think in their own like little bubble, and it's hard to say like what does it look like in that kind of little bubble of becoming like less anti-Semitic or less prone to using indiscriminate strikes. I don't know. But in general, I think, and this is why I'm so disappointed the elections didn't happen. In order for that kind of reformist movement to occur, they need to be accountable to the public, right?
Yeah. Yep. No, that is very true, and I'm sure there's a lot of frustration because Mahmoud Abbas is supposed to have a 4-year term, and what is he in like his 16th year or something?
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember I was watching like one of the panels, and somebody was like, Hamas was gonna win. Well, Hamas was actually gonna lose.
Mm-hmm.
Hamas only was gonna win because Fatah. Sorry, I said that wrong last time. Some family members gave me so much shit. Fatah.
It's pronounced Fatah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always say Fatah because it sounds easier in English.
Yeah. Fatah fell apart. The Marwan Barghouti, he was running in prison, and all the polls indicated, and he was challenging Abbas directly for the presidency. All the polls indicated he would absolutely like cream Abbas. Abbas would be like a pool of geriatric trash,
Mm-hmm.
And like other people like it's split into like 3 different lists, and that's why Hamas was going to get a plurality. But now, like, even in the West Bank, people are like very, very supportive of Hamas now because they attribute that one rocket attack in Jerusalem as like we really showed them, but like
but that rocket could have hit in like a Palestinian in Jerusalem, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, that's what I don't understand. Like, a lot of people don't talk about this, but it's not just Jews that get killed by these rockets, right? Because they're indiscriminate. It's like plenty of Arabs and Palestinians too. Yeah.
It makes sense. They're not thinking rationally.
Is there do you think that there's ever a chance where Palestinians are going to have like another choice that's not just Hamas or Fatah? Like, can there be another party?
It's totally possible. Yeah. I think that the way things are going right now, there probably will be a different party other than Fatah. But first elections need to happen, and like some democratic process needs to be taking place. I'm really excited, kind of, this time, Israel has assaulted Gaza like twice before, but this time it was different,
Yeah, this time felt different. I agree.
yeah, this time they stopped before like 2,000 people died, you know?
Yeah.
That's insane to me, you know? I have a lot of hope kind of about what can be done. Whether or not people are going to be able to get that thing done is a big issue, but I think it's been demonstrated very, very clearly that Palestinians can get the entire globe to protest with them, and they can, through using, like an uprising as they used this time, they can get their, demands met. And I really want to see them keep doing that.
Yeah, like there are other alternatives besides like Hamas's tactics. I think like honestly, like I'm noticing way more of like kind of like an international condemnation of what Israel's doing from compared to what it used to be. I'm seeing way more Jewish friends. Like I used to be one of the only Jewish people in like a room that was willing to criticize Israel's actions. Now it's much more common. So it feels like a lot of those tactics, honestly, I mean, just simple, like, I don't want to sound so fucking self-important here, but I do think that like content creators and stuff, like changing kind of like, the culture at least, and the dialogue helps a lot. And, especially just telling like stories of what happened, will just make people a lot more empathetic. The truth is that like, I mean, do you think like as a result of Israel's bombing of Gaza in like the last few weeks, do you think that Palestinians in Gaza have become like more radicalized as a consequence or less radicalized?
Probably definitely. No one gets bombed and they feel like, okay, I'm gonna be a normal, healthy person, or have centrist politics or whatever.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? They're not going to see like it makes you less nuanced, right? Like just naturally as a survival mechanism, because yeah, you're not going to see like nuance in like the people who are trying to kill you.
Yeah, it's like,
yeah.
I see. I'm collateral damage. My son that
Yeah.
died is collateral damage.
Yeah, you're not going to think that way. You're just going to think, this person's trying to kill me. They're dangerous. We need to defeat them, right? As simple as that. Yeah, so that's why like violence just breeds more violence, and yeah, it's totally toxic. Oh, people are asking, Harry, do you want to link your YouTube channel and stuff?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because some people were asking.
Okay, I think I got that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, you guys should all subscribe to Peace Process. It does really, really excellent YouTube videos. I've watched every single one of them. They're always great.
Really?
Yeah, they're great.
What'd you think about my Uyghur one?
I haven't seen that one yet, so I'm still gonna watch that one. But
dang, okay.
Okay, you know what? Maybe I'll watch it on stream and I'll react to it. That could be cool.
No, don't do that. That would be I would get embarrassed.
Oh no. Like I don't know enough about the Uyghur situation to even like give good criticism, so
so you don't have to worry. I read like one book, so it's not like that detailed. I'm no expert, but I did I read one book and I just kind of focused on creating like a nice little story on that.
Do you think Palestinians as a whole like could ever accept like a two-state solution? Or do you think they're very dedicated to just like, Israel wiped off the map?
I think there was a poll I saw, right? It's hard to describe because it seems they're very, very much against it, the two-state solution. But I don't think that necessarily translates to just, wiping everyone in Israel off the map, right? A lot of them, there's like, okay, a third of them want one state, and let me like look up the polls specifically that I'm speaking about.
Sure.
Do I have it up? Okay, hold on. But basically, most Palestinians, what they see of the future, they have a very pessimistic attitude on it. They're very against like the peace process because to them it just seems like it's failed. Hold on. So, Palestinian election polls. All right. I should have had this open. So if you ask them about what they want, so 40% support and 57% oppose the concept of the two-state solution, and 55% think the solution is no longer practical due to settlements expansions. So that's you know.
I can understand the latter, but I do think
Yeah.
what's going to have to happen is there's going to need to be like land swaps. And I don't think that they think that Israel's going to agree to land swaps. But I think a potential, like another Israeli government, not this one, another Israeli government could agree to those. Where like you remove at least some Jewish villages and stuff from some areas in the West Bank in return for, other areas of land and all that stuff that gets agreed upon by the various parties.
For me, I'm not thinking about one state or two state at the moment. What I'm thinking about is, because so many things need to happen in order for that to be, even possible at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm very agnostic on the whole issue. Would I prefer one state, kumbaya, all that stuff? Yeah. But I also prefer just like whatever option will give Palestinians the freedom as like quickly as possible.
You just want the oppression to stop.
Yeah,
Like,
I want it all to go away. I want them to be able to build like an airport in the country, so I don't have to like go through Jordan and then wait at the Israeli border and be given like the business,
Yeah, that's why I focus so much on settlements, because I think settlements are the biggest impediment to that. Yeah.
I think I would more strongly support a one-state solution if I saw in Israel or in Palestine kind of a movement dedicated towards the concept of one person, one vote. Of like, if that were to happen, I would be more supportive of a one-state solution. But for the moment, I don't see any like serious kind of movement towards that.
Yeah.
But once I do, and it's like very, very serious, like there's a big shot politician advocating for that, in government, then I'm definitely going to support the one-state solution more, because I think, like something that has a basis in just like recognizing, okay, we all live here, let's just make a democracy. If a movement like that occurs, like I'm definitely going to support the one-state solution. But for the moment, it doesn't. So
yeah, I think it needs to grow organically over time. To me, like the best option is having two states side by side, living at least in somewhat peace, and eventually they can kind of meld together. But yeah, right now with the situation, Jews still very much still feel, especially with like how common anti-Semitism is in Palestinian communities, and how common like Islamophobia and racism is in the Jewish communities. Both populations, I think, feel very targeted by one another, and fear leads to a lot of war crimes. And I can just totally imagine, especially Jews would be very concerned about not potentially being, especially if Palestinians get a right to return and everything. They would be very concerned about being a minority, because of how they've been treated in the past, being a minority. So the only way, I think it would,
anyway. Because like some portion would have to remain within a, because the settlements are just like that widespread in the West Bank.
Yeah.
Some would have to be in Palestinian borders, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, so that's why like those people would have to,
right? But
at least those people, I guess, have a choice, like be a minority here, or you can be a majority in Israel, if you move. It's like unfortunate, but at least Jews have like an option, because for now Jews just don't feel, they don't feel safe, and I understand why they don't feel safe being a minority in a country, because of, again, how historically they've been treated in that situation. So I feel like a one-state solution, if we just like boom, snapped our fingers, do one-state solution right now, I think that it would just end up being like a full apartheid system in order to keep Jewish fears comfortable, like at bay. So like, even if you had the majority of Palestinians, they wouldn't get to vote or anything like that, in order to keep it a Jewish state.
I think that in a one-state solution, or those who advocate for a one-state solution, I think that I don't know if it's necessarily like fair to say, okay, they want it instantly. I think they do imagine that it's just gonna have to be an entire bargaining process, and it might take years to formalize. Yeah, at least that's how I imagine a one-state solution happening. Like if we give like a nice little framework for that to occur, that would be good. If a one-state solution were to be, I mean, right now all I'm focused on is ending the settlement, getting that a pause. I really think that, like, if we can get 250,000 people to come out in the streets in support of ending the occupation and pausing the settlement, that would be amazing to me, right?
Yeah.
Because it only seems like we can only get people out when they're being kind of when people in Gaza are dying, but we can't get people out when to critique like systemic things. And I think it's because like just how people have like their attention span is like that. You know, they pay more attention to the giant explosions, but no one pays attention to like the
That's why we need to
and
keep talking about this
things like
issue,
that.
even when there isn't like a, official proper war with bombs going on.
Yeah, definitely. I think I don't know what your opinion is on this. But I have read the 200 plus page Human Rights Watch report, and I think that we need to make, for this to be to succeed, I think there must be much more of an acknowledgement that the system under which Palestinians are placed is apartheid. I think that is something that I think more people need to recognize, and people are starting to recognize that now.
The reason why I struggle with you there is because Palestinians are not like Israeli nationals. So in country, for example, I agree with the way they get treated is horrific. But at the same time, countries regularly discriminate against non-citizens. For example, like if you're an American citizen, if you go to Canada, you're not going to get your healthcare covered the way a Canadian citizen would have their healthcare. So there's like discrimination on that sense.
Under international law, the definition of apartheid includes because apartheid is a crime, right? It has to be like something that you can prosecute people with. The definition includes an intent to maintain a system of domination of one group over another, right? That's like the first bit, and the other part is enacting that system, and the third bit is inhumane acts and inhumane acts, one or more inhumane acts.
Yeah, but it's about populations within your own country.
Yeah, if we look at like the first bit, which is the intent, people in Canada, Canadian policy isn't made with the intent to create a system of domination over Americans, right? This is the difference in Israel, right? So you have people in government who will say settlement is a national priority, like that's like codified into law now. You have government ministers saying, I'm going to Judaize the Galilee, right? Who set like specific like population goals for like East Jerusalem or Jerusalem. They want like 60-40 Jewish, Arab respectively. They in the West Bank, they're settling, right? I think that the settlement shows kind of an intent to dominate the population there. And the report goes on to explain kind of the systems and inhumane acts. In that sense, I think it constitutes the crime of apartheid.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree on this one. I don't mind like organizing a formal debate with you on this. Like ever since I think it's probably just a semantic difference, because of the way like it's I guess the word where the word apartheid means, and the way it was done. Particularly, I mean, apartheid was a word to describe what was happening in South Africa, and I think it's really important for Palestinians to at least be recognized as their own nation. And so they can have their own self-determination, because I feel like the apartheid thing falls into actually like a lot of like Zionist or Israeli right-wing Israeli narratives of Palestinians being a part of Israel, and I think that because the nature of apartheid is that you're discriminating against your own citizens, and you're keeping them separate, right? For that
Well, I mean, according to the definition under international law, like citizenship has nothing to do with it specifically. Wait, we're black people. We're
Yeah, but if
not
that were
Africans,
true, then
citizens.
any country, for example, Jordan would be committing apartheid against Palestinians when they discriminate against Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
So
So,
it would be like a meaningless term. It's just nationalism.
well, I don't want to get too much into, Jordan. I specifically pay more attention to, Palestine proper, because that's where my family's from, and I want to understand the system that affects them there.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Jordan probably does, to some great extent, discriminate against Palestinians there, but just naturally due to my position, I do focus more on, the West Bank and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's
I just think-
get out of the apartheid thing because it's just at the end of the day it's a semantic debate. And you and I both agree on the core issues that Israel is like committing like an illegal occupation of Palestinians, and what Palestinians are experiencing is unjustifiable, and it needs to stop. So, anyways, but do you think that there's ever, I guess, because I know that you said that you're not feeling well because you got vaccinated today, right? Congratulations. Yeah.
Not today, yesterday. But...
Oh, yesterday, yeah. Do you think that like, what is like the best way, I guess, for if someone's Israeli, right, and they believe at least in Israel's, right to exist as much as any kind of, or they want their country to exist, but they want to go back to say like they're against the occupation, they want to go back to pre-1967 borders, all that stuff. What's the best way for them to engage a Palestinian, and talk to them, right, and try to at least come to some kind of like conclusion between the two? Like, are there any like no-nos, things not to talk about?
To my knowledge, I think some no-nos would be denying the Nakba. That's probably one of the biggest no-nos.
Mm-hmm.
Probably justifying civilian casualties. That's a big no-no to me. What else?
Yeah, the whole like, oh, they're just human shields. It's like, okay.
Yeah, the human shield argument. Here's one that's a giant no-no. There's this Golden Mirror quote.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Children,
yep.
If only they love their children as much, or whatever.
That's a narrative that is very common today in Zionist circles.
That is
still to this day.
That is insanely like fucked up and sadistic.
Ben Shapiro said something similar.
Yeah. Do not say you like Ben Shapiro. That's a big no also.
Yeah.
I can't, but I think Ben Shapiro like shows kind of like the double standard, because you can like advocate in the past for like ethnic cleansing as he had done, and that like what do you call like a stupid thing he did, right? And like you can still like people will still listen to you on what you have to say about the conflict. That kind of stuff irritates me.
I agree. He gets away with saying a lot of shit that's incredibly vile. I mean, that tweet that he made.
Israelis like to build.
Yeah, Israelis like to build, Palestinians like to bomb.
And sewage. I mean, that's fucked up.
Yeah, first of all, associating sewage with Palestinians is such a disgusting thing in the first place. And then on top of that, and it furthers like this old kind of anti-Arab, like racist narrative, that has to do with like Arabs being dirty, right? Like it's like a huge stereotype that still exists to this day, and it's funny because historically it was like the exact opposite. Like Arab nations considered, Europeans to be dirty because Europeans, especially in the medieval period,
they didn't bathe, right?
Yeah, they believed in washing their clothes rather than bathing as a way to avoid disease. And as you know, like a huge part of Islam is being clean. It's a huge part of Islamic culture, definitely. And that's why Islamic culture furthered so much, science and stuff when it comes to like germ theory and cleanliness and all of this stuff. So it's like such a huge lie. And they use bidets, and I'm really into bidets. So it's like a huge joke on my channel. So yeah, it's a nasty narrative, and Yeah, that quote from Golda Meir is something that still is a common attitude to this day. I remember growing up in school, and when I was taught about Palestinians, I was taught that Palestinians hate their children more than they hate us more than they love their children. That was like a very common attitude, which is so fucking disgusting and couldn't be anything further from the truth.
Yeah. I like playing around with that sometimes. You know, me and my brother, we like playing around with that. We kind of like grilled our mom, like, "Oh, do you hate Israelis more than you love us?" And she's like, "What are you talking about?" Like,
what mother in the world thinks that way? Like,
Golda Meir, she wasn't the worst prime minister. You know, I think like Begin did some work. Like,
Begin is
shit, you know.
Yeah, I'd say like Begin and Netanyahu
like,
are the two really bad ones, in my view.
Yeah, but like that quote always that quote sticks with me because I think it's the most painful way of like explaining kind of our existence. You know, I think it's the most insulting.
Yeah, because it furthers this narrative that, again, that like is a huge part of like the propaganda, the pro-Israel propaganda that I see, that, you know, whether they're Muslims or Palestinians or Arabs, there's always like different terms that get used, but that like they don't value human life, and the Jews value human life, and that's why there's such a, say, disparity with numbers. Like when you look at like the numbers and see how many more Palestinians die in conflicts compared to Israelis, they say that, oh, that's the explanation, but like that's not true. The explanation is like there's a huge different economic situation and power situation between the two groups. Palestinians and Gazans don't have access to bomb shelters. They don't have an Iron Dome. Like they can't afford all of those things. Like they're not in that situation. So, it's just a way to excuse that shit.
They really fuck with you because like I remember when I was a kid, you know, I thought, okay, I'm a Muslim and I'm a Palestinian. Am I just like naturally a bad person because of that? And because that narrative was like all over the place in the U.S. You know, growing up. Yeah. It's like
I can't even imagine what it's like growing up as like a Muslim like post 9/11 in the United States. Yeah. Probably very tough.
At least it's not Europe, okay? Let's just say that. At least I'm not living in Europe. Like France is like banning the hijab or something. Like
in Quebec too, I think they banned it. Or was it the niqab?
Really?
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway. Quebecers are both anti-Semitic and Islamophobic. They're just like white nationalists.
They're xenophobic, yeah.
Yeah.
They just hate any sort of like immigrant, you know, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're very anti-immigrant in general. As a whole, even Jewish communities have like completely left. Like there's still some in Montreal and stuff, but like they as a whole, I guess, you know, like left Montreal because of the amount of like white supremacy that's common there.
Do you know the YouTuber JJ McCullough?
No.
Yeah, he's a Canadian. He just talks about Canada a lot, and he's always like shitting on Quebec. It's funny.
Yeah, it's the only group we're allowed to be, you know, prejudiced towards and not get canceled. It's very, very frustrating.
Forget about gamers. Quebecers are the real oppressed minority, along with Italians.
You mentioned earlier that denying the Nakba is one of those big kind of like, I don't know if the right term, like trigger moments or like things that really hurt from a Palestinian's perspective. Do you think that anything would start, do you think that it would help if Israelis as a whole started to be more honest with the crimes, I guess, in their past and with what happened in the Nakba and acknowledging the ethnic cleansing and stuff?
Of course, yeah.
So like, yeah, just like, because there's nothing worse. And I mean, obviously what I've experienced does not compare at all to what Palestinians have experienced. But I know just on a personal basis, when something shitty's happened to me, like, you know, a death threat's been made to me online by a streamer, you know, something like that.
Who's doing that?
You know, I won't name names, but the worst thing in the world, right, is when someone denies that happened. Like, or they don't talk about it, or they don't acknowledge it, because it just feels like it like re-traumatizes you every single time they engage in that denial. So I can only imagine how Palestinians feel, like how often the Nakba gets denied. Even when like Israeli historians, as I went into in the stream, acknowledge it happened, right?
Yeah,
that
but
the
you have,
government's
people
still
like
not
Benny
apologized.
Morris. Like Benny Morris, I think like there's an interview in 2004 where he's just like, Ben Gurion should have finished the job. and
Yeah,
we wouldn't have
I've
these
seen him do that
problems.
interview. That's why I always try to separate citizen Benny Morris from historian, because like citizen Benny Morris says the fucked up shit. So
Yeah, he has like this entire article in like Haaretz, like getting like Biden, you shouldn't have called it the Armenian genocide a genocide, and he gets into all these reasons, and
he's gone off the rails totally.
yeah,
I think he
yeah.
lost someone in the second Intifada, and I think like it totally changed his perspective. I remember hearing him speak once. That like I think the consequence of like the Camp David peace deal getting rejected, I think he just like, he just snapped and he went a little crazy.
Most likely, yeah.
But yeah, that's why like but like even like in his research, he demonstrates like we went into detail about like literally we have records of actual orders from like the IDF saying to kick out Palestinians. Like we have like from directly like from their sources. And Israel still as a whole hasn't acknowledged it. And I do think like acknowledgement of it, and at least some kind of financial reparations or something could do a lot to try to start, fixing some of those wounds. Because right now they're just open and they just keep getting bigger.
Yeah. I would like to see, and you touched on this earlier, but I would like to see the right of return acknowledged. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean all 5 million are coming back, but at least have the right acknowledged, That's something I would like to see happen. And you could deal with like however...
And maybe have like a symbolic amount of people come or something like that, or some kind of like something that's negotiated to make sense. Obviously, there's practical issues now.
I think Israel has a law called the Absentee Properties Law. And like there are like still people in Israel, right, who can't go back to the land they were like pushed out from. Like they were like internally displaced because of this law. And like if you weren't residing there during like 47 to 48, it's just not yours anymore, basically. It's like, oh, I wonder what's happening in 47 to 48 that make them leave their house, It's such a it is such a fucked up law.
Yep. No, it is. There's a ton of a ton of systemic issues like within Israel that need to be fixed. There's like issues just with racism against like other Jews, like that happens and stuff. But I'm hoping they work on it. But like I'll be honest, I was super optimistic until like the last conflict happened, and I think I was on like a panel arguing about why I was optimistic, and then literally the next day, Israeli police storm Al-Aqsa Mosque, right? And I'm like, oh god, and it just like completely burst my bubble, and I became like a doomer for 2 weeks.
I couldn't sleep during the entire.
Yeah, me too. It was very upsetting.
I was just like, holy shit, what the fuck is going on right now? Some protester got like I don't know the details specifically on this one, but don't hold me to it. But somebody was like shot in the Nablus.
There started to just be like lynchings going on just in Israel itself.
It was insane. I really, that's why I think that, I really do think Israel needs to change, because I don't think it can last how it is right now.
I agree with you. I think like actually
its notion of itself is like, it's too they can't. It's too exclusive to even like the Arab population living there right now. And like what like I read like there's this one poll like 49% of religious teens and 29% of secular teens like think Arabs shouldn't vote, have the right to vote. I was like, what the fuck?
There is such a problem with the Haredi. Do you know the term Haredi?
Yeah.
There's such a problem with the Haredi. I'm telling you, I get discriminated against as a woman in Israel because of the Haredi.
Yeah. And the thing is, their population is growing the fastest.
Yep. Because they have more kids.
They're like they're like twice the fertility rate than.
Like people have been talking about Israelis becoming more right wing, and I do think that overall they became more right wing as a consequence of the Second Intifada and the Gaza pullout. But I think after that, the increase in right wings, like everyone I've met anecdotally, like that's Israeli, has not like become more right wing. What I've noticed is just like, you know, the Haredi populations that had tons of kids, particularly for the Zoomer generation. Those Zoomers are now coming of age, right? They're now engaging in politics and stuff, and like they've now, yeah, and like those Zoomers are Haredi, and it's like, and now the amount of control that they have for anyone who's secular in Israel, it's a problem as well. In terms of just like rules for women being at the back of the bus and shit like that.
Really? They make women sit in the back of a bus?
Oh yeah, like and if I walk in, there are Haredi neighborhoods where they literally say, if you are a woman, it is like the law, like in that neighborhood, like in Beit Shemesh or something. If you know, if a man's walking on your like on your side, like your sidewalk, you have to cross the street. So to be modest, right? So he doesn't look at you, and it's always on the woman to have to walk across the street. And like there are rules like that, and the Israeli government does very little to you know, to do anything about it, because right now Netanyahu needs the religious parties and needs to satisfy them in order to remain in power. So he just like lets them do shit. I mean, Jewish women, like if I wanted to divorce in Israel, I literally can't get divorced unless my husband agrees to it. And that's because of a Jewish law. Like, yeah, and because the rabbis have control over that. So there's a huge problem in general with secular Jews also being, obviously it doesn't compare to what Palestinians are going through, but there's just so many issues in Israel. It's why I don't live there. And it's why I never intend on going back, because it's just like, yeah, it's a hard place to live in general.
I'm worried about what's going to happen when they get like more, like the more and more political power they get. Like, what are they going to do? You know,
especially if it's Haredi, like as the Haredi population keeps growing, that's scary, right? Because they believe it's some really wacky shit. You know, I don't know if you've ever read the Old Testament, but have you read you know, there's a tribe called Amalek that's in the Old Testament. It's called like the evil tribe. At some point, God tells Solomon he calls on Solomon to genocide all of Amalek, like kill every woman, every child. And Solomon, he kills most of them, but he can't kill, I guess, a mother and her son. He just couldn't do it. His heart broke, right, at what he was doing. And then God punishes him for it. That's like the moral of the story. Like you couldn't finish a genocide, right? And the way they justify it, it's justified, I guess, in the Old Testament, is that like Amaleks, they're not really human. They're not like a real human population. I don't know if we have any record of what they are historically. I don't even know if they existed historically. It's just a segment of the Bible. But the idea is that Amalek's not really human. They were put there by God to be like the representations of the evil. And they're just like an evil tribe, and they just want to bring all things in the world. Like Hitler's descendant of Amalek, you know, Osama bin Laden's a descendant of Amalek. Like anything that's evil, like Harvey Weinstein's probably a descendant of Amalek, right? Like that's the idea, like that they're all like super evil, and that's why evil exists in the world. And so that they're like inhuman. And literally, there are segments of the Haredi population that literally believe that Palestinians are Amalek, right? And you can just imagine, right? Like if now overall Judaism doesn't believe that at all, right? They believe like Hitler is like Amalek, for example, but they won't believe Palestinians are. But you can imagine how dangerous of an idea, like just ideologically and religiously, that will be if that becomes mainstream. Because like once you've kind of like this population, that literally means like genocides happen when people consider a group inhuman, right? Mm-hmm. And like that's exactly how the Nazis justified what they did to the Jews. So like, you know, if that idea ever starts getting really spread and becomes mainstream, that Palestinians are Amalek, which is obviously not true, it creates all these really fucked up justifications for a potential genocide. And that stuff really, really scares me. So that's why like I focus so much on trying to, incentivize and structure like, the leftists and the centrists within Israel, and trying to like empower them and all that stuff. But yeah, it's scary because like, this is the problem with democracy. Like breeding is the thing, and you outbreed. That's why everyone here needs to be having more babies.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like, go forth and multiply.
In America, like, I have hope because like the the youth are more like left leaning, and they're gonna replace the older generation in a bit, and we're gonna whatever that effect that's gonna have, but like when you see like the trajectory in like other countries, it's like, what the fuck's going on?
Yep. It's very, very, very upsetting, and it's just so different than, I don't know. It's just very sad, like how this whole thing has happened, and how it's turned out. And I just hope that the conflict doesn't last as long as like other historical conflicts, like, yeah. But
I don't necessarily think like I'm thinking about Armenia and Azerbaijan right now. Like they technically had like a two-state solution where like they got separated from one another, but like so many things were left like unsaid, and now they're still like fighting each other. So I'm not necessarily certain how that will work,
Call me a bit of a softie, but I feel like stories need to be told, and people, because I don't think, as much as I try to like talk about facts and logic and stuff on my stream, humans don't change their minds like with that shit. I think humans mostly change their mind through empathy and through emotions. And I think like, for example, no one gave a shit about the Holocaust. I know it's like really hard to believe because everyone talks about it now, but like no one gave a shit about the Holocaust until like the 1970s.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because of like Holocaust on film. Like there was a show called the Shoah, and then there was a lot of Holocaust films, and then Schindler's List was a big one. And I think like there needs to be more movies and stories like about what Palestinians have gone through. Like just to change people's minds.
There's this movie on Netflix called The Present, and it's all about like this one Palestinian dad trying to buy his wife like I think a birthday present, or like an anniversary present, and just like the shit he has to go through the checkpoint, and just like,
yep, I wish more Israelis would see stuff like that, because that would, yeah.
If anybody here has Netflix, go watch that. It's only 20 minutes. It's really, I think it really does encapsulate kind of like the how humiliating it is to go through like the checkpoint, constantly just to go from one place to another. Yeah,
like that kind of stuff. That's why I guess my form of advocacy, like I don't go to protests and shit anymore, but my kind of advocacy, is focused obviously on what I do online, but also like really trying to prop up like films that tell Palestinian stories. I think that's like, there's actually like a huge like film community within both the West Bank and Gaza, and yeah, and also Israeli Arabs do the same thing. Like, yeah, I think watching and seeing the stories, especially for Jews as a whole, like Jews know exactly what it's like to be going through those kinds of checkpoints, to have that kind of humiliation happen to you. Like it's embedded like in our history. So like that is something to connect to.
Jews, though, because there is something wrong with just Americans in general.
Yeah, that's true.
Who have just like zero empathy for Palestinians. I feel like I remember hearing that like one of the ambassadors, I think either to Israel or from Israel, was just like, let's just, we should put more time in talking to the evangelical community, because it's starting to become too much of a waste of time with the Jewish American community, because they're really not for it as much as it is necessary to continue unequivocal support for Israel. Like Jews just aren't there anymore. It's
I agree. Like they have to follow like a genocidal like religious attitude that literally wants to eventually kill Jews. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and they think like the reason they want like a war with Iran too, because I think that has something to do with their like prophecy or whatever.
Oh god, it's so fucked up. Like, I don't hate religion. I admire a lot of what religion has done. I just wish people could like separate it a little.
I think there's nothing wrong with being religious, but like, you're believing, if you're like intentionally trying to bring on Armageddon, you know,
Yeah.
like maybe you should take a chill pill, you know.
Yeah, that shit is scary as fuck. But yeah, I will let you go. But yeah, you guys should all watch Beast Process. He makes amazing videos about Palestinian issues, and you also just released that video about the Uyghurs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm jealous of your animation, even though you told me it's easy, but it looks pretty hard.
It takes it takes time, but it's not too hard, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna link my channel again.
Yeah, I'll subscribe. Awesome guy. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
I will, yeah. Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
You too.